entitled Empowering Women and Promoting Gender Equality Through Foreign Policy. Before I hand over the floor for the official welcome, allow me to recognize the following dignitaries who have so generously graced us with their presence here today. His Excellency Anthony Philip Spencer, Vice Chair of the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States and Ambassador Permanent Representative of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to the organization. Lou Ann Gilchrist, the Organization of American States. His Excellency Anton Edmonds, outgoing Ambassador Permanent Representative of St. Lucia to the Organization of American States. His Excellency Noah Lynch, Ambassador Permanent Representative of Barbados to the Organization of American States. Her Excellency Alejandra Solano Calbaceta, Ambassador Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to the Organization of American States. Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Roqueber Leon, Ambassador Permanent Representative of Panama to the Organization of American States. Her Excellency Carmen Monton, Permanent Observer, Ambassador of Spain to the Organization of American States. Her Excellency Sandra Honoré, former Ambassador of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Panama, former Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General and former head of the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti, MINUSTA. Ms. Juanita Lont, Interim Representative of Suriname to the Organization of American States. Ambassador Lacelia Prince, Chief of Staff to the Assistant Secretary General to the Organization of American States, and former Ambassador Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the Organization of American States. Senora Alejandra Mora Mora, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, SIM, to the Organization of American States. Ambassador Jacinth Henry Martin, Advisor and Coordinator, OAS Country Offices in the member states, and former Ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to the Organization of American States. Mrs. Deborah Stout Lynch, wife of the Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Barbados to the Organization of American States, and in her capacity here as President of the Organization of the Women of the Americas. Members of the Diplomatic Corps and international organizations, representatives of the OAS General Secretariat, members of the Organization of the Women of Americas. The protocol stands adopted. Allow me to apologize. Excuse me one second. Oh dear. Pardon me for that. I have a slight right here. Okay. Allow me to apologize on behalf of Her Excellency Ambassador Yolande Smith, who is unavoidably absent today due to unforeseen circumstances. However, Her Excellency sends her warm wishes for a successful event. We also received regrets from Ambassador Nestor Mendez, Assistant Secretary General to the OAS, who was supposed to be here with us today, but is unable to join us here due to travel commitments in relation to a work mission. Ambassador Mendez similarly conveyed his sincere wishes for success in this venture. 2 years ago, in 2019, the SIM, in partnership with the Organization of Women of the Americas, began a timely and critical dialogue among women ambassadors of the Inter-American system. Today, this high-level conversation continues, featuring a gender-inclusive set of panels to discuss the empowering of women and the promotion of gender equality by looking at the extent to which our current foreign policy in Latin America and the Caribbean embraces and reflects gender considerations. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I am pleased to invite Senora Alejandra Mora Mora, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, to give the official welcome and inaugurate our proceedings. Madam Executive Secretary, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, mi querida compañera Jasmine. Agradezco profundamente esta introducción y el saludo que ha hecho, del cual acompaño a todas las personas que hoy podemos estar juntas para hacer esta hermosa reflexión en un tiempo en el cual se impone conversar sobre lo que sucede en la región y sobre el empoderamiento económico, sobre las mujeres y sobre el rol que juega la política exterior en este proceso. Así es que celebro y quiero agradecer al equipo de la CIM que podamos estar haciendo esto, a las profundas conversaciones que hemos tenido con la embajadora Smith y con la embajadora Prince para avanzar en una agenda también que nos permita llegar de mejor manera al Caribe y el proceso de articulación con todas las embajadoras y embajadores que siempre están abiertos y atentos al diálogo y a trabajar en conjunto. Quisiera, en estas palabras de introducción, señalar que, y bien lo decía nuestra compañera Jasmine, que en noviembre del 2019 ya habíamos hecho una alianza con OMA para organizar un diálogo con las mujeres embajadoras del sistema interamericano. Este evento destacó el papel clave que desempeñan las mujeres líderes en el servicio exterior, al tiempo que también identificó algunos de los obstáculos persistentes que impiden o que limitan la plena participación, el liderazgo en estas posiciones, más mujeres en la política exterior. Y a medida que las mujeres diplomáticas en ese evento expusieron las enormes presiones que enfrentan para manejar los desafíos de hoy, la mesa subrayó la importancia del liderazgo transformador e inclusivo de las mujeres y que es necesario para navegar tiempos inciertos y sin precedentes. Por eso en esta ocasión, la CIM ha organizado este evento para dar seguimiento a esa hermosa conversación. Esta vez, poniendo la mirada de género en la política exterior. La política exterior feminista. Y como abordamos temas centrales desde un enfoque de género, en particular, hablar un poco de cambio climático, migración y seguridad multidimensional que se imponen en nuestra agenda de la región. Y permítame reivindicar aquí la palabra de la política exterior feminista, porque el concepto de derechos humanos siempre ha estado ligado a esta enorme quehacer, pero hoy también estamos colocando este impulso que ha venido dando países en Europa, pero también en nuestra región como México y otros países. Y es una reivindicación hermosa de entender los impactos diferenciados de las mujeres y de un movimiento hermoso, transformador, que ha venido cambiando la agenda mundial. Cuando nosotros hicimos el diálogo en el 2019, estaba contextualizado en un clima geopolítico distinto. Hoy, este clima en la región, por razones que estamos viviendo todavía, de un enorme desafío, no estaba hace 2 años. Y además ha venido cambiando exponencialmente con una rapidez alarmante, cambiando algunas certidumbres que creíamos que estaban ahí y hay unas incertidumbres profundas que tenemos como desafío conversar y llenar y colocar desde nuevas dimensiones. Nuestro hemisferio está sobrecargado, nuestros países continúan lidiando con las amenazas epidemiológicas, ambientales, económicas y una creciente inseguridad multidimensional, así como una erosión de derechos y libertades democráticas en algunos países, así como el cambio climático, migración y el desplazamiento de miles y miles de personas a través de la región. Desde el inicio de la pandemia, la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres señaló que toda crisis tiene un impacto diferenciado sobre las mujeres. Además, advertimos que en las crisis generalmente se dan retrocesos. Eso que dijimos hace más de 1 año es exactamente lo que hemos ratificado con el pasar del tiempo. Nuestra vulnerabilidad global es el denominador común a medida que los países enfrentan esta total interdependencia en un escenario cada vez mayor. Y en este escenario, permítanme señalar que ha habido un mayor cuestionamiento del multilateralismo y el rol de las organizaciones intergubernamentales. Y por eso es tan importante que nuestra organización poderosa en esta región pueda reflexionar sobre las implicaciones de cómo apropiar de lo que está sucediendo y llevar respuestas transformadoras a la región. Sobre esta línea, quiero comentarles que desde 1997 el Comité sobre la Eliminación de todas las formas de discriminación contra la mujer señaló claramente desde ese entonces una recomendación sobre la vida política y pública. Insistió en ese momento que los gobiernos deben garantizar la presencia de las mujeres en todos los niveles y esferas de las relaciones internacionales, lo que exige que se incluya en la representación de su gobierno, en las cuestiones económicas y militares, en la diplomacia bilateral, multilateral, en las delegaciones oficiales y en todos los eventos y conferencias regionales e internacionales. Sobre este tema, la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres ha venido señalando un concepto poderoso que es el de la participación de las mujeres y asociado a la paridad. Hemos señalado y hemos interpretado la paridad no solamente como un tema numérico, de que del 50% de la población de cada país somos mujeres y que en esa misma dimensión debemos de estar representadas en cada uno de los espacios y en las sillas de toma de decisión. Pero no solamente hemos dicho eso, hemos dicho que para sentarse en estos espacios tenemos que ejercer el poder. Y para ejercer el poder debe ser espacios libres de violencia. Y además que debemos de llevar una agenda construida durante muchos años de manera globalizada por muchas mujeres de la región. Y hemos venido durante este tiempo resaltando la importancia de lo que las mujeres aportan en este proceso de ejercicio de toma de decisiones. Aportan las perspectivas, experiencias distintas a cada tema, aportan y llevan en su valija todo lo relacionado con la igualdad, con los derechos humanos, los temas centrales en la gestión de crisis y en la resolución de conflictos, en todos estos temas que estamos viviendo y en estos contextos, para la construcción de la paz, para la gestión del medio ambiente, de los recursos naturales, de la migración, de la cooperación bilateral. Por eso, entonces, aquí con la OEA, con el número de mujeres representantes en el Consejo Permanente, que ha venido variando de un periodo a otro, pero que nunca ha alcanzado la paridad y que actualmente más o menos representan un 24% de los Estados miembros. Se impone entonces esta reflexión sobre el tema de la participación también de las mujeres en la política exterior. Pero más allá de los números, la política exterior feminista o con perspectiva de género, como se reconoce, es una condición sine qua non para el desarrollo económico, para la prosperidad, para la seguridad, para la paz, con base en una evidencia de que entre mayor igualdad, mayor estabilidad y que existe un valor simbólico en el sentido de la visibilidad de las mujeres y de la integralidad en la toma de decisiones. Uno de los objetivos entonces centrales de este evento es potenciar la presencia de las mujeres en la diplomacia, en el multilateralismo y además en cómo llevar una agenda de género en alianza con los hombres y las mujeres que permita a la región salir de esta crisis con una visión integral y con una participación igualitaria de las mujeres. Agradezco profundamente que estemos en este debate hoy y que podamos hacer de mejor manera unas rutas para que esta OEA siga siendo un motor impulsor de la transformación de la realidad de nuestros países y agradezco profundamente estar en este espacio haciendo estas palabras introductorias y poder también estar con el vicepresidente del Consejo Permanente y representante de de Trinidad y Tobago, el señor embajador Anthony Phillips Spencer, para conversar y abrir este espacio. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary, for not only the warm welcome, but for so fittingly framing the discourse as you exquisitely and nimbly gave that cogent analysis of the hemisphere. I particularly want to highlight the 24% women's representation at the OAS that you showed us, because that indicates so much how far we are from parity. Allow me at this point in the proceedings to acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Anne de la Blanche of the Permanent Observer of France, who is in attendance. We are very happy to have Ambassador de la Blanche with us here today. Thank you for coming, Ambassador. And now I invite His Excellency Anthony Phillips Spencer, Vice President of the OAS Permanent Council and Permanent Representative and Ambassador to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago to the OAS, to deliver remarks on behalf of the Council. Your Excellency, I am honored and pleased to offer you the floor to do so.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Ms. Odlum. Excellencies, colleague, permanent and interim representatives, and permanent observers to the OAS. I must recognize, even though the protocol has been established, the Executive Secretary of the SIM, Ms. Alejandra Mora, and her entire team at the SIM Executive Secretariat, with whom I've had the pleasure and privilege to collaborate on several occasions. I must also acknowledge my most distinguished compatriot and presenter, Her Excellency Sandra Honore, former Ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago to Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Panama, and the United Nations Special Representative and Head of MINUSTA. I must also acknowledge the President of the Organization of Women of the Americas, Mrs. Deborah Stout-Lynch, distinguished OAS colleagues, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, again, good morning. In my capacity as both the permanent representative of Trinidad and Tobago to the OAS and the current Vice Chair of the OAS Permanent Council, I am honored to deliver introductory remarks at this event, which is hosted by the first intergovernmental agency established almost 95 years ago to ensure the recognition of the human rights of women and the only hemispheric political forum for women's rights and gender equality. I'm also honored to recall that I was privileged, in fact, to witness firsthand the initiation of the partnership between the SIM and the Organization of Women in the Americas in 2019, which inaugurated this conversation with the women permanent representatives to the OAS. At that time, colleagues may recall that that event included our beloved and now dearly remembered former permanent representative of Paraguay, and that at that time, my dear spouse, Mrs. Joanne Phillips Spencer, served as the OAS president. I'm therefore heartened this morning, and I commend this ongoing OAS-SIM-OAS collaboration for this continuation of an essential conversation for empowering women and promoting gender equality through foreign policy. I also welcome the inclusion of men permanent representatives in this discussion. We are key champions for achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls in the Americas. Further, I must commend our distinguished permanent representative of Grenada, even in her absence, Her Excellency Ambassador Yolande Smith, for her indefatigable role in advancing and promoting greater inclusion of the experience and expectations of Caribbean women and girls in the perspective of the work program undertaken by SIM. Since the adoption of the Inter-American Convention of Belém do Pará on the prevention, punishment, and eradication of violence against women, progress on issues related to the empowerment of women and girls has benefited from 3 transformational global platforms for positive social change. The launch of the Beijing Platform for Action in 1995 was followed by the increased emphasis placed on gender equality in the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, adopted in 2000. And finally, by the expanded title of Goal 5 of the SDGs in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted in 2015 to include women's empowerment. In our hemisphere, during the past 5 years, women of Afro descent or indigenous heritage have ascended to become either the first such or overall female presidents of Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago, Prime Minister of Barbados, Vice Presidents of Costa Rica and the United States of America, Governor General of Belize, soon to be the first Chief of Defense Staff in Jamaica, and the first woman Secretary General of CARICOM. However, much more needs to be accomplished to improve the voice and visibility and the equal participation of women in politics. In adopting the Declaration on Renewed Commitment to Sustainable Development in the Americas post-COVID-19 at the recently concluded 51st regular session of the General Assembly, OAS member states, including with the technical advice of the Executive Secretariat of SIM, also expressed their collective and concerted intent to ensure that targets and indicators of SDG 5 are prioritized. The occasion of this conversation during the 16 days of activism for the elimination of violence against women, particularly given the debilitating challenges to the advances previously made in women's rights and gender equality that have been observed during this pandemic, is also therefore exceptionally timely. Further, the sub-themes of climate change, migration, and multidimensional security that frame the title for this second conversation with OAS Women Permanent Representatives have all been identified for deliberate and decisive attention in OAS General Assembly Declaration 104, just adopted at the 51st regular session. These themes represent some of the most pressing concerns for all member states, and in particular, the small island and coastal developing states of the wider Caribbean. I therefore sit now in great anticipation and look forward to the inclusive, innovative, and integrative influence that this conversation will have on foreign policy within the framework of the OAS to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls in the Americas. Congratulations. I look forward to a very successful conversation, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for those insightful remarks, which have helped to catalyze the gender-based discussion that we will be embarking on here today along the thematic axes of climate change, multidimensional security, and migration. We appreciate the landscape that you plotted for us regarding all the international commitments which underpin the discourses that we will be having today. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And most of your analysis, has helped us realize the importance, as you underscored, of including men in the discourses that we are having. Thank you, Ambassador. At this point, we move into looking at the gender dimensions of climate change. To do so, we have empaneled 3 distinguished ambassadors to begin our day's high-level conversation within the framework of multidimensional security. 2 of these ambassadors are from the Caribbean. Her Excellency Luann Gilchrist, Ambassador Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and His Excellency Noah Lynch, Ambassador Permanent Representative of the new Republic of Barbados. Congratulations to Barbados. Congratulations to Barbados also on having 2 women at the helm of leadership in that country. And from Costa Rica, we are deeply honored to have join us Ambassador and Permanent Representative, Her Excellency Alejandra Solano. This first panel will be ably moderated by Ambassador Jacinth Henry Martin, advisor and coordinator of the OAS country offices in the member states. Ambassador Henry Martin, I am so pleased to give you the floor to proceed with the panel.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. It is my absolute pleasure to be here. I want to adopt the protocol that was established, but I particularly want to highlight and to greet Executive Secretary Mora Mora, distinguished excellencies, permanent representatives, permanent observers, distinguished panelists, all, and colleague moderators. Knowing the importance of today's topic, I'm not only honored to be the moderator of the first panel, but keenly interested myself in the exchange which the occasion affords. Climate change is not simply an issue with the potential to disrupt economic sustainability in our member states. It actually affects every facet of our everyday lives, devastating prospects of food production, generation of avenues for progress in our capacity to work, to provide for our families. Climate change is the fount of cumulative challenges which have a domino effect on our very existence on Earth. At the center of all this, the family suffers, and wherever we find the family, we find women at the center of it all. It is noteworthy and I believe a fantastic signal that we are being supported in today's discussions by so many of our male ambassadors. Congratulations to you. We know that this is not an issue that can be treated by only one sex. And so we're all in this together, and it warrants that we put our minds together in finding solutions and certainly in engaging and having discussions. I want to open the session by affording an opportunity to the 3 panelists to speak to us about their views on the topic at hand, probably a minute, just because I know, because our panelists are representing different countries, I'm sure that the impact is felt in different ways, and it would be wonderful to hear what the views are, certainly what countries are doing. And so I'm going to ask Ambassador Luann Gilchrist to start, please, followed by Ambassador Alejandra Solano Cabalfeta, and our gentleman will bring up the rear, Ambassador Noel Lynch. I open the floor. Ambassador Luann Gilchrist, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good morning, all excellencies, special guests, Ambassador Sandra Honore, fellow panelists, moderators, Executive Secretary Alejandra Mora Mora, and Ms. Yasmin Odlum of the SIM, and the other members of the SIM team, the President of OWA, Mrs. Deborah Stout-Lynch, staffers of the Secretariat, viewers, good morning, everyone. I find this topic very interesting and very timely, especially as we're now observing 16 days of activism against violence against women. And it is especially important for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, given that in the month of April, our country suffered the effects of the explosive volcanic eruptions. That is the broad frame of my introduction. With regard to advocacy, however, for women's empowerment, I believe that as a member of the diplomatic corps, the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the United States of America at the Organization of American States, where there is such a great focus on human rights and especially the rights of women and girls. I need to say and girls because coming from the education sector, most of my focus was on the promotion of the rights of the girl child, not to the detriment of the rights of the male students. I would say that advocacy on gender affairs is a shared responsibility. The reality may be that many women leaders consider that the greatest share of that responsibility falls on their shoulders by merit of their sex. That is perfectly within reason. As men and women perceive and experience the world differently and are motivated by these perceptions and experiences. While renewed focus is needed on certain types of issues which affect women and girls specifically and touch on their dignity, the approach to gender issues must be balanced and focused on equality and equity, and I stress equity. We must therefore not cause the pendulum to swing so far as to deflect attention from the issues affecting men and boys. I admit, however, that there may be gaps to be filled in some national policies and strategic actions to ensure that women do not suffer from discrimination of any kind and that they're able to participate fully in national processes. This is a right given to them as enshrined in our national constitution. My approach, therefore, is to advocate for and promote gender equality to ensure that there is parity of esteem for women and their issues, and that women's empowerment is promoted, and this in tandem with other gender issues. It is worthy of note that our ministry, the ministry responsible for social issues at home, changed the name of one of its divisions from Women's Affairs to Gender Affairs. And in that way, they were able to establish parity between the two sexes. And so that is the approach that our country has been taking, giving prominence, of course, to women's issues, women's empowerment, without placing men in a disadvantageous position. And I need to remind this August gathering here today that our Governor General is female, that's Her Excellency Dame Suzanne Duggan. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gilchrist. You certainly made the point that we're all in this together, as I had mentioned, but that the pendulum should not swing so far as to disenfranchise one sex over the other, but that certainly equity, gender equality, parity are important as we continue to work towards the harmonious society that we want, with everyone being able to access all of the rights that accrue as humans. I'd like to invite Ambassador of Costa Rica, please, Ambassador Alejandra Solana Cabalfeta, to fill us in with an overview of your take on the issue, certainly as it relates to your country and what you're doing, and any views that you may have with regard to the topic as well.
Muchísimas gracias, embajadora Henry Martin. Es un placer estar aquí con estos distinguidos panelistas, con nuestra invitada especial, la señora Honore, a quien es un placer tenerla con nosotros. Esto es muy importante porque dentro de los invitados y panelistas están nuestros tres especiales embajadores de Santa Lucía, de Trinidad y Tobago y de Barbados. Yo quisiera agradecerle a la Secretaría la creación de este evento, pero también la inclusión de los embajadores varones en esta discusión, porque sinceramente no es un tema que atañe solamente a las mujeres. No podemos dividir este asunto, como bien lo dijo nuestro estimado embajador Anthony Philip Spencer. Este no es un tema solo que atañe a las mujeres embajadoras. Es importantísimo que ellos se conviertan en champions del tema, porque nos evidenciaron algunos datos acá. La señora secretaria ejecutiva Mora Mora, a quien saludo también en este momento, nos evidenciaban porcentajes y estadísticas. Por ejemplo, en el Consejo Permanente, que solo tenemos una representación femenina del 24%. Nos evidenciaban también hace unos días en ONU Mujeres que a nivel global de todas las jefas de Estado únicamente hay 6% de mujeres en el mundo y presidentas 7% de mujeres en el mundo. Yo creo que estas estadísticas sorprenden porque somos el 50% de la población mundial, como bien se decía anteriormente. Entonces, me parece que este tipo de discusiones tienen que ser constantes, tienen que ser frecuentes, tienen que ser inclusivas. Y esta oportunidad de hoy, donde podemos darle diferentes enfoques del género, en particular en este panel que nos atañe en este segmento sobre cambio climático y política exterior y política exterior feminista, me parece muy importante. Estoy dispuesta y muy contenta de poder compartir con ustedes desde mi enfoque personal como embajadora de carrera y nuestra política de inclusión a nivel del gobierno. No es solo un tema que me interesa a nivel personal y profesional, sino que también con mucho orgullo puedo decir que es un tema nacional, que es un tema de gobierno, donde en Costa Rica tenemos una ley de paridad para el Congreso, pero no la tenemos para el Poder Ejecutivo, y sin embargo hay paridad de gobierno en mi país, y sin embargo hay representación de mujeres en la política exterior en puestos de alta envergadura. Esto es algo que se representa también con los últimos nombramientos de embajadoras ante la Organización de los Estados Americanos, y creo que ya es una barda que está muy altamente establecida y que no puede bajar independientemente del gobierno que venga. Este es un momento también interesante para nuestro país en cambio de política. No podemos bajar el estándar que tenemos actualmente independientemente del partido. Entonces, agradezco este espacio para poder intercambiar de manera concreta estos ejemplos, y de nuevo muy privilegiada por estar con las distinguidas embajadoras y embajadores que nos acompañan el día de hoy. De nuevo, muchas gracias a la Secretaría Ejecutiva, doña Alejandra. Muchas gracias.
Gracias a usted, embajadora Alejandra Solano. Yo, según lo que yo había oído, usted ha hecho surgir uno de los temas que yo creo va tal vez en el futuro a llegar a ser de más discusión, pero ha hablado de la ley de paridad con relación a la representación en nuestros estados, en nuestros gobiernos, en la formulación de política, y también para poder mejorar el insumo que nosotros todos como ciudadanos de una sociedad podemos contribuir a las discusiones. No solamente una parte de la sociedad tiene todas las respuestas, pero sí tal vez podemos incluir a todo el mundo. Gracias por sus palabras. I am now going to invite Ambassador Lynch to present his overview.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Henry Martin. Let me first also acknowledge the presence of the Secretariat in this particular exercise, and of course, Secretary Alejandro Mora Mora, in being here with us, the Executive Secretary being here with us. And I also want to acknowledge the presence of our specially invited guest, Excellency Sandra Honore, for being here with us this morning. Thank you very much for your kind words on Barbados becoming a republic. I think it was an act that was long overdue. I know it might seem to be an anachronism to folks in Trinidad and Tobago and Dominica and Guyana, but we finally arrived at the right spot. Yo iba a dar mi discurso en español, pero en el último momento cambié la mente. I think it's better if I speak English and get it over with. I'm very happy to be a part and parcel of this discussion this morning, because I think it comes at the right time within the makeup of the Organization of American States in a multilateral setting. And I am particularly pleased to see how you created the nexus between the topics that you've chosen, particularly the climate change issue and the role of women within the context of climate change and how it affects all of our societies. Now, I want to start though with the issue that I believe in the beginning, I believe that Ambassador Anthony Philip Spencer reiterated that this may be the only multilateral setting on the globe in which women's rights are particularly outlined and clearly spoken to in a specific organization. Now, Article 15 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter speaks specifically to the preservation and good stewardship of the environment. Now the founding fathers of this organization were pretty much, even before we started to talk about climate change and the like, had already established the concept that the stewardship of the environment was particularly important for human development and the protection of the environment to achieve sustainable development for the benefits of future generations. Now coming on the heels of that and on the Paris Agreement and coming on the back of COP and what we just did in Glasgow, I think it is particularly important that the inter-American system re-recognize or once again re-emphasize the huge importance of climate change and all the other effects of climate change to sustainable development. Now I obviously people talk a lot about the issues of we talk about global warming, we talk about sea level rises, we talk about the physical aspects of how climate change is affecting our societies, but without understanding in great measure some other aspects of the issues of climate change. Climate change, the greatest existential threat that we have ever faced as a globe, is affecting us disproportionately to other parts of the world. And we do not have the resources to be able to deal with it. Just diverting resources away from the things that we've already established in the Sustainable Development Goals puts us even more under economic and social pressure within our environments. And therefore, what happens is it exacerbates the issues that that our societies have always had to deal with and which have disproportionately been dealt with by women more so than men. You're talking about issues, for example, of poverty, hunger, racism, discrimination, intolerance and inequality that affects the most vulnerable people of our society, and particularly women. And interestingly enough, women have always been in essence, in inverted commas, undervalued within the societal makeup. We talk about increases, for example, even COVID-19 and increases in violence, particularly domestic violence. You've dealt with issues of unpaid care workers. You talk about lack of access to labor markets. These are all things that have disproportionately affected women. And these have been major setbacks to the economy and to the economic rights of women to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, if that is so, and a woman's role is fundamental and over-reliant in certain aspects in our societies. Women have always been caregivers in our society more so than men. Women have always been at the forefront of looking after children more than men. Women have always been at the basis of, they're more female teachers than there are male teachers in any society. And therefore, the issues of being able to get women to articulate these issues, women can articulate these issues much better than men do because they feel the pain much more so than men. No. I am proud that we have, at least in Barbados, that we have seen the light. I think that Prime Minister Motley has committed herself to ensuring that the imbalance that we had in gender issues in Barbados are being addressed. I mean, people in Barbados, you talk a lot about what happens. We have 10 national heroes. Only one was a woman, but she just made another woman a national hero. She's addressed the issues of the presidency of the Republic, a female. I know that she was the Governor General, but again, another female. And Ms. Motley's commitment has always been that whenever she got the leadership role, she was going to correct the imbalance of women and break through the glass ceiling, because this is still a male-dominated society in many aspects. When we dealt with the issues of international relations, Dame Billy Miller was the longest serving foreign minister in this hemisphere, right? She, a female, right? She served as foreign minister. So Barbados has been at the forefront of giving women the opportunity to correct the imbalance that has always existed. Are we there yet? We're very far from it. And just let me say, I don't want to take up much more of your time in the introductory remarks, but surely the OAS as an organization, given the pillars of this organization, need to address the issues of inequity as it relates to even the leadership and the stewardship of the OAS. There's never been a female Secretary General of this organization. There's never even been an Assistant Secretary General female of this organization, as long as it has existed. And I think if we're going to deal with the issues of speaking to how governments are dealing with it individually, I think within the multilateral system, we've also got to use some form of affirmative action tactics to deal with some of the issues that we're dealing with. Finally, in Barbados, we have long established a ministry of gender equity and gender equality. We have now, one of the things that Ms. Motley did was she created she put this ministry as a standalone ministry with the Ministry of Elder Affairs. Well, and you know, again, Elder Affairs addresses the issues of not only men and women, but who are the ones that give care to most of the elderly people in our societies? Again, women. And therefore, what must exist is not only do you carve out a space for women to be recognized and their value recognized, but the aspects of how you deal with it in a multilateral system must be articulated by women more so than men. And therefore, I am pleased to be a part of your conversation this morning. I know these are only the opening remarks. There's a lot more to be said. So thank you as a male for inviting me to be a part of this discussion that affects both male and females. It doesn't mean that we're putting down men. It means that we are lifting up women. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lynch, for your passion and for what you've added to the discourse. You spoke about the link between the environment and human development, which I think must be taken on board. If we don't see it as serious an issue as that, we tend to downplay it, even in the face of science. You spoke about the link between climate change and sustainable development. And I think when we speak of all of that, part and parcel of that is the nexus between climate change and the frequency and the intensity of natural disasters. And you ended very passionately by speaking about the important role and the contribution that women have played across the spectrum of endeavors. But you also ended on a very interesting note. You spoke about how lacking women have been at the helm of some governments, but you specifically mentioned international organizations, and one with which I think we're all very familiar. So thank you for your input. I want to now launch into very specific questions. And so I'm going to pitch my first question to you, Ambassador Lynch, given your passion. I'm going to say to you, well, first of all, maybe I should start with the general question to everyone. Very briefly, while advocacy for human rights, including those of women and girls, must be shouldered by everyone with a voice and a platform. There's often the perception that this is predominantly the domain of women, and particularly of women leaders and ambassadors like yourself, well, male in the case of Ambassador Lynch, who are positioned to advance issues of gender equality, not just at home, but also to speak to the issues that may be in their own member states in the broader context of multilateralism. In the context of this perception, where do you see the burden of leadership on this issue falling, and how do you perceive your role? So Ambassador Gilchrist, Ambassador Solano, Ambassador Lynch, so across the board, how do you see your role as an ambassador? So I'd like to start with you, Ambassador Lynch, and then Ambassador Gilchrist, and then Ambassador Solano. I would say as briefly as we can.
Thanks again. I believe that I've outlined to you where I see the role of an ambassador being played, whether that be of male or female, within the multilateral system and within the discussion. Now, I am one that believes that the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women is important to our overall development. And therefore, if a woman articulates that position, I think most people will say, well, that's obvious. But I think coming from a man, coming from a male, I think that really kind of repositions the issue of whether or not you're getting the full bent of it. Respect and value of women's considerations and situations is critical coming from the mouth of men. And I think within this organization, and within any organization, or within my role as an ambassador, is to continue to empower women to make sure they're given the opportunities to break these glass ceilings that we've established. But in addition to that, I believe the advocacy goes beyond just articulating words. I believe that there's got to be actions that you take within your own space. And that's why I believe in things like, I've said this at the General Assembly, the affirmative action. I mean, I said this before, I will repeat it. I've advocated that we need to have this organization as a multilateral organization change for the better as it relates to women, and therefore change the charter. When I say change, I mean amend the charter so that affirmative action takes root, that every other term, a woman must at least be the Assistant Secretary General of the OAS. Now, people will tell you, they want people to be recognized by their own worth, and I agree with that. But there needs to be some action taken if the normal action is not leading to where you want. And therefore, I think that my role is advocacy. My role is, yes, articulation, but my role is also to ensure that even within my own workspace, within my own embassy and within my own country, that I advocate for changes and alterations to how women are treated and how full, equal, and meaningful participation of women is warranted and is accepted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Lynch. Very innovative and your position is quite clear. So I will move on to Ambassador Gilchrist. Please, your response on the question raised.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I am going to speak in very calm tones here, because one of the common perceptions, and it is a misperception, is that women in their advocacy often come across as being strident, emotional, need I say hysterical. And if you look at the etymology of the word hysterical, it has everything to do with women. So linguistically, biologically, culturally, socially, women are thought to be hysterical, which is why I'm speaking in such calm tones. Now, that is an unfortunate label that has been attributed to women, often women in leadership roles. Therefore, it is very important that women be given the space and the respect which they need to be heard. Often women speak, but they are not heard because they're considered to be too emotional, too strident, too hysterical. No matter how logical and pragmatic they are in the content and in the substance of their advocacy. Now, this is a good argument for what I said earlier, for the promotion of a point I made earlier, and which is that advocacy is a shared responsibility. We as women need to be alongside our male counterparts. We need them to understand the experiences which we have and which only we can recount. Ambassador Lynch, my colleague, for example, will not experience, for example, the displacement of almost 10,000 Vincentian women when the volcano erupted. He will understand in broad contours what happens, how people feel, but there are certain elements of a woman's experience which will not come home fully to a man. And that has nothing to do with any sort of deficiency in a man's understanding or his perception of the world. I say this, therefore, to say that in my advocacy for gender equality, I respect, value, and appreciate the support of my male counterparts. It is very important that we women in our advocacy have the balanced approach, and that the male perspective is taken into consideration in our advocacy. And that is the extent of the trouble in which I'm getting myself right here this morning with my male colleagues. Thank you.
Well, being female myself, you're not in trouble with me. I certainly can appreciate what you're saying as moderator, but I also embrace what Ambassador Lynch is saying. I'm the mother of only sons. And so I walk a very fine line, and I would say, like yourself, that I'm pretty balanced in that regard. I thank you because what you brought out, Ambassador Gilchrist, was the experiential component of a woman's reality. It does not deny the fact that men are not empathetic and that they cannot, go along with what you're feeling and be supportive. And certainly Ambassador Lynch spoke about the appreciation of the value of a woman's contribution. But there is that experiential component, which regrettably, they can, be supportive, but they can't feel themselves. I'm going to ask Ambassador Solano to give her input on this question as well.
No, muchísimas gracias por los aportes tan interesantes de mis colegas. A mí me parece que el rol de una embajadora, igual que el rol de un embajador, es tratar de hacer los esfuerzos necesarios para que se refleje una equidad en diferentes paneles, evidenciar, por ejemplo, un caso histórico de un panel que estaba hablando de la importancia de la lactancia materna y los 6, 7 panelistas eran varones, sin tener una noción real de lo que significa la lactancia materna con un enfoque natural femenino. Eso es importante evidenciarlo. Creo que el papel de la mujer embajadora es, además de tratar de aportar para que la paridad se refleje en la secretaría, en los diferentes enfoques, como el tema que estamos hablando hoy, el enfoque de género en cambio climático y medio ambiente y prevención de riesgo, y aportar las prácticas de sus respectivos países. Este enfoque multilateral en la OEA, de lo que más resalto la experiencia de Costa Rica y mi experiencia personal como embajadora, es la importancia de aprender de todo lo que los demás países comparten con nosotros en los diferentes foros. En particular, recientemente estuvimos hablando de temas relacionados con la mujer y el emprendedurismo en temas de tecnología, cambio climático y otros ejemplos que tal vez podría compartir más adelante en temas de la mujer en el CIDI, en el Consejo de Desarrollo Integral de la OEA. Entonces, me parece que nuestro rol es evidenciar esas falencias cuando existen, aportar con apoyo necesario técnico o político cuando no existen las capacidades para poder hacer esa representación de género necesaria, porque recordemos que el nivel de juego no está nivelado. Eso es una realidad histórica y de la manera en que nosotras podamos contribuir, porque ya llegamos a ser embajadoras, unas de carrera, otras no, pero en la manera en que podamos contribuir a que más mujeres puedan ser embajadoras, ese es un gran aporte y un pequeño, gran legado con el que podemos trabajar como norte. No es que es porque se espera que lo hagamos. En nuestro caso, en mi caso, perdón, no es porque soy mujer que tengo que hablar de temas de género. En realidad, como lo comentaba en mis introductory remarks, este es un tema país, es un tema nacional, es un tema de gobierno, donde es importante resaltar que para nosotros es el papel de la mujer, la equidad y la representación equitativa en todos los foros y en todos los espacios. Es un tema que tiene mucha tarea pendiente, donde se han realizado muchos avances, pero donde podemos aportar para contribuir a evidenciar esas falencias y tender puentes para lograr quitar eliminar o acercar esas brechas de género en la política exterior y en puestos de liderazgo. Muchísimas gracias. Continuamos en las siguientes preguntas.
Gracias, embajadora. Le agradezco su respuesta y yo había tomado nota de algo que había puesto en la mesa, es que los esfuerzos de presentar, de dar voz, de representar el equilibrio que merece, que amerita el caso en cada oportunidad. Esto sí va a dar la realidad de lo que está haciendo y presentando y contribuyendo, no solamente los hombres, pero sí está haciéndolo de una manera de equilibrio, cierto que va a poner en la mesa también lo que está haciendo las mujeres también. Gracias. The next question is for Ambassador Lynch. I was about to ask that, so I'm going to ask individual questions now. Ambassador Lynch, given the overwhelming science-based evidence of the global impact of climate change and the existential threat this poses to vulnerable insular and low-lying states in the Americas, please share with us how your country, Barbados, is prioritizing its national response to climate change at home and in the context of its bilateral and or multilateral engagement in speaking to the issue and its potentially deleterious implications for these small insular low-lying states. So this is specific to Barbados, and we'd just like to hear from you on this.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. One of the things that Barbados is actively pursuing is really a change in understanding how climate change is affecting the country. Now, I say this in this context. Everybody knows about the issues of your lower-lying coastal state, which means most of our cities are on the coast. There's little coastal protection, so you've got to be able to deal with issues of sea level rises and the likes. You deal with the issues of fighting every day to mitigate the issues and a hurricane does hit. Well, if you have a weather system that comes that is going to affect you. So we've got the Roof to Reef program, which we are protecting everything, creating resources made available to the populace to create better housing stock, some better, more resistant shelter for people. On the one hand, if you live in a house or we've changed the building codes, we've said, for example, that you've got to be able to have a roof that can resist a certain amount. And obviously, we're doing as much as we can to not only restore the reefs, but when we call it the Roots to Reefs program, it's also about being able to strengthen your coastal defenses against weather systems, sea level rises, and the like. But in addition to that, I think there's one aspect of this that I think is missing from the thing. We in the Caribbean, and we in small island developing states, primarily in coastal states, are the ones who are reaping most of the deleterious effects of climate change. But at the same time, we are not the ones who are contributing to the carbon emissions that are creating most of what we've got. So one of the things that we are doing, we've committed already in Barbados to stating that we are going to become carbon neutral in the next 5 years. Barbados has made the point that we are going to become carbon neutral within the next 5 years, and that we're doing all that we can to ensure that. We're doing as much as we can also to ensure that in that context, for example, we said we must have an equal distribution of hybrid vehicles within the next 5 years as well. Barbados is we're not going to continue to burn fossil fuels in the way in which we used to burn fossil fuels before. You know, one of the things about talking about importing electric cars is if you import electric cars and then the electricity that is fueling them is burning fossil fuel in some old bunker C diesel plants, it means that you're really defeating the purpose. So you've got to really change out everything that you're doing. So Barbados is also committed fundamentally to doing that, ensuring that we do our part to be able to change our carbon footprint to ensure that Barbados does become carbon neutral by it was at the time, I think it was 2023, I think it was stretched that out. But one of the aspects of it too is that we continue to fight in the international arena, not only for the recognition of the fact that we are being disproportionately affected by the issues of climate change. One of the things that Prime Minister Motley and her team is constantly putting on the table is that there are too few resources being made available to those who are polluting, to those who are creating the problem in terms of in terms of resources for climate adaptation. We just do not have the level of resources available to us through the international financial institutions, for example, to be able to deal with some of the issues of climate adaptation. And therefore, if you are the ones who are causing it, but you control the resources in the international financial institutions, well, then we want a real seat at the table to be able to discuss this sensibly. I'm not going to sit by and let you affecting me. You are ones who causing the problem, and then you sit and then you control the resources, because we've got to divert resources away from other development issues towards this. So climate adaptation and funding for climate, or resources for climate adaptation, are also one of the fights that Barbados is in globally to ensure that we get there. And then I want to say something. I just want to add on a little something to this. On to the last question that was just said. I heard Ambassador Gilchrist speak about the issues of whether or not men are affected as much as women, and whether they have the sensitivity. I grew up in a household where my father used to say, ask your mother. And when you come with something sensitive, he used to say, ask your mother. And my mother used to take it on. Women need to demand that the rights of place be also given. If it is an issue, it's equally distributed between the father and the mother. So women need to demand that men also take their place, okay? Even in the international setting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Lynch. We are pressed for time, and I want to make sure that each ambassador, each panelist has an opportunity to answer at least one question. And so this question is for Embajadora Alejandra Solano Cabalceta. Las democracias participativas se benefician enormemente cuando se consideran las opiniones y recomendaciones de las mujeres, con miras a mejorar el equilibrio, la eficiencia y el impacto en todas las esferas. ¿Existe un mecanismo consultivo o existen protocolos en su país para invitar, recibir e incorporar los aportes de un mecanismo nacional de mujeres u ONGs para formular o revisar la política exterior?
Muchísimas gracias, embajadora. Le comento que en cuanto a la política exterior, en particular en nuestra Cancillería, tenemos dos mesas intergubernamentales, una relacionada con el derecho internacional humanitario y otra relacionada con los derechos humanos, donde participa activamente la sociedad civil, incluida, por supuesto, sociedad civil representada en temas de asociaciones de mujeres, en particular junto con otras minorías, para poder abordar todos los informes que son necesarios presentar como país ante las diferentes esferas internacionales multilaterales. Además, tenemos una participación muy activa como miembros de la coalición de acción feminista por la justicia climática de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas, donde tomamos muy en particular ciertas políticas públicas, compromisos que tenemos para poder facilitar el acceso a recursos financieros, como mencionaba el embajador Lynch, donde tenemos también compromisos para crear políticas públicas y promover también el emprendedurismo y el liderazgo también en la zona rural de las mujeres. Un tema importante hablando de la sociedad civil en prevención de riesgo es el papel que tienen las mujeres en las organizaciones comunales cuando se trata de asumir liderazgos y además participación activa en los comités comunales para prevención de riesgo, alerta temprana y otros mecanismos muy importantes donde la mujer, a pesar en temas de desastres naturales, como mencionaba la distinguida embajadora Luan Gilchrist sobre prevención de riesgo, las mujeres muchas veces son víctimas en desastres naturales y también son líderes en las comunidades para poder organizar la región, en su jurisdicción. Este tema es muy importante, pero también es importante recalcar que tenemos específicamente medidas orientadas a mujeres con recursos como en el programa que se llama Más Mujeres, Más Natura, donde se habla de pago de servicios forestales como prioridad a mujeres que tienen terrenos y que contribuyen a no destruir o deforestar sus terrenos y los mantienen como una muestra de contribución al cambio climático y a la reducción de emisión de gases, gracias al PNUD, al MINAE, al INAMO y a otras instituciones nacionales. A esas mujeres se les paga con prioridad el pago por servicios forestales. Se han hecho líneas de crédito con facilidades para que en esas comunidades rurales tengan acceso también a recursos, de manera que nos alimentamos, nuestras políticas públicas se alimentan de la voz local, de la voz femenina y evidencian también las necesidades y las brechas donde tenemos que tomar acciones afirmativas, acciones preventivas que puedan abordar lo que nos retroalimenta esa sociedad civil, como usted bien menciona. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a usted, embajadora. Y we will continue with a question for Ambassador Gilchrist. Ambassador Gilchrist, mainstreaming gender balance ensures that our states can benefit from the fount of ideas and perspectives which females and males bring to the discussion and policymaking table. How integral are gender-based considerations in developing climate change and disaster reduction and risk policies in your country? How are they incorporated into such policies?
Thank you very much. Now, gender balance, I would say, is an important element of policy formulation and of collective action. Women make up 49% of the population of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Less than 20% of the parliament, however, is made up of women, whereas approximately 50% of the leadership positions in ministries are held by women. In addition, there is a relatively high number of female-headed households. You will note, therefore, that apart from one key platform, and that is Parliament, women are present in leadership positions, are sitting at the table, and should be able to influence decision-making and promote gender mainstreaming in policy development. However, I noted that the country gender assessment, which was conducted about 5 years ago on St. Vincent and the Grenadines, noted that even in our National Economic and Social Development Plan 2012 to 2025, gender mainstreaming was not a main feature. So most of their recommendations therefore focus on mainstreaming gender in national policies. And I'm sure that the Ministry of National Mobilization, which has responsibility for gender affairs, has taken these recommendations on board, and that gender mainstreaming will now be will cut across different policy areas in the various ministries. However, I must say that gender equality and the empowerment of women are areas which have received renewed focus following the explosive eruption of the volcano in April this year. For example, with nearly 1/5 of the population displaced and with women and girls living in public shelters, their vulnerability to various forms of violence was thrown into sharp relief. This led our national authorities to request the United Nations Population Fund to conduct an audit on gender-based violence. The findings and recommendations are being used to inform and guide gender-responsive policies related to the impact of disasters. Further, the responsible ministry launched a 3-month-long awareness program for families affected by the volcanic disaster to promote, among other things, psychosocial health, child abuse prevention, and gender role development. In summary, the volcanic eruptions and the severe rainfall which followed created an opportunity for our country to view and address the gaps which existed in our policies and practices. I cite that as a very specific example which exposed to our national authorities the need for keener and sharper focus on very specific issues relating to the survival, the well-being, and the protection of women. And so based on what was discovered, based on the gaps which were uncovered during the post-eruption period, I'm sure that my government has now taken it as a matter of priority to ensure that there is gender mainstreaming across ministries, across platforms, so that women's issues, the issues of girls, are taken on board and built into national policies for the promotion of the human rights and the full enjoyment of all sectors of the population in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gilchrist. I think that we're going to have to wrap up. I was signaled some time ago that we are going to have to clear the space. We do have another panel coming up. Even before I close and express my appreciation to the panelists, I want, even at this stage, because I know she's going to be with us, to recognize and to congratulate and applaud the distinguished featured speaker who is going to be taking the floor after, Ambassador Sandra Honoré, Caribbean national, an ambassador, a female, of course, and a decision maker and policy influencer, who I'm sure has addressed all of the issues over the long trajectory of her work. From time to time, I'm sure she's spoken to all of these issues. And so, Ambassador Honoré, I salute you, and I just want to highlight your presence, as many have done before me, before I leave. In closing, and on behalf of SIM, certainly on behalf of the Executive Secretary and all of the hard workers whose efforts have resulted in the success of this first panel, to the panelists, Ambassador Luan Gilchrist, Ambassador Alejandra Solano, Ambassador Noel Lynch, I want to congratulate you for your words, which have moved the discourse just a little bit further. There's always more work to be done, but every little effort counts towards this. And when we can have males and females speaking on an issue about which they're equally passionate, that makes the job a little easier. Thank you very much for the excellent presentations that have been made, for your responses to today's questions. I thank you, I salute you, and I bid you farewell as we close the first session and move into the ones that are upcoming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Henry Martin, for your excellent, excellent moderation of this first panel, as you steered our esteemed panelists through such a fine and robust exchange of ideas on the topic. I want to congratulate the panel for its hard work. And this panel has left us much food for thought as we segue into our featured presentation for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have the pleasure to introduce to you Her Excellency Ambassador Sandra Honoré, an eminent career diplomat from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, who has served her country with honor and distinction. Allow me to introduce you to Ambassador Honoré before she takes the floor to present. Ambassador Sandra Honoré entered the Trinidad and Tobago Foreign Service in 1979 and has had more than 30 years of professional experience working in international affairs, diplomacy, and peacekeeping with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, the Organization of American States, and the United Nations. Her Excellency served as her country's special envoy in the Embassy of Brazil. She served in Brazil as her country's special envoy from 1983 to 1988. She was a diplomat there. And from August 1990 to December 1996, Ambassador Honoré served in the Executive Office of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. From 1997 to 2000, Her Excellency was attached to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago's embassy to the United States of America, which is also the permanent mission to the Organization of American States. In July 2000, Ambassador Honoré was the first woman to have been appointed Chief of Staff in the history of the General Secretariat of the Organization of American States. And we want to pause at this moment to applaud Ambassador Honoré for that. I see Ambassador Prince here, who has followed in the footsteps of Ambassador Honoré, and we are equally delighted to have Ambassador Prince with us. And during that assignment, which concluded in July 2005, Her Excellency was Principal Advisor to the Assistant Secretary General and Coordinator of his Executive Office, the Director of the Permanent Council, and General Assembly Secretariats, and supervised many aspects of the organization's work on Haiti, including the OAS Special Mission for Strengthening Democracy in Haiti. At the Foreign Ministry, Ambassador Honoré served as Director of the CARICOM and Caribbean Affairs Division, of the Americas Division, and as Chief of Protocol. Ambassador Honoré was appointed Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary in September 2007 and was subsequently assigned from December 2008 to August 2012 as Ambassador to Costa Rica with concurrent accreditation to Guatemala and Panama. On 10th July 2012, and I'm sure my Executive Secretary will be very excited to learn this fact, Ambassador Honoré was awarded the Grand Cross Silver of the National Order of Juan Mora Fernandez by the government of Costa Rica. In May 2013, Ambassador Honoré was appointed by the United Nations Secretary General as his special representative and head of the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti, called MINUSTA, and she served in Haiti from July 2013 until the end of that mission in October 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so pleased to offer the floor to our distinguished guest speaker to address you on the topic, the impact of women's leadership on foreign policy in the Americas. Excellency, you have the floor to make your presentation.
Better now?
You are on, Excellency. You have the floor, Madam Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was saying that you do me too much honor, but thank you. I know that the protocols have all been observed, but I will still take the opportunity to greet the Vice Chair of the OAS Permanent Council, the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, Permanent Representatives, Permanent Observers, Madam Chief of Staff to the Assistant Secretary General, Madam Advisor and Coordinator of the OAS country offices in the member states, Madam President and members of the Organization of Women of the Americas, members of the Diplomatic Corps and international organizations, staff of the SIM and of the OAS General Secretariat, other distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much to the Inter-American Commission of Women for this invitation to join you to participate in this session on empowering women and promoting gender equality through foreign policy. As you continue your conversation with representatives and permanent observers to the OAS and by extension with the hemispheric community. On this 12th day of the 16 days of activism following the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, I wish to echo the persistent call of women and girls all over the world to put an end to this scourge, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, during which the already unacceptable rates of violence against women and girls have increased around the world. Many of the other speakers so far have already made reference to this violence. It is useful to recall that the basic architecture of foreign policy of any country, big or small, must be based on the following 3 or possibly 4 pillars anchored in the United Nations Charter of 1945. The pursuit of international peace and security, including human security, the promotion of economic and social development, today enshrined in the concept of human development, the protection and promotion of human rights, today anchored in the universal system of human rights and humanitarian affairs, and added to this more recently, in relative terms, the securing of a sustainable environment as an intergenerational human right to development. In the aftermath of the United Nations Conference on the Environment and Development, or the Earth Summit, held some time ago in June of 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, when small island developing states were recognized as a distinct group of developing countries facing specific social, economic, and environmental vulnerabilities. Of the 38 United Nations member states and 20 non-UN members in the CIDS group, 15 are OAS member states. The Agenda 21 program adopted in Rio stipulated that states should commit themselves to addressing the problems of sustainable development of small island states. And before you ask, where is she going with this? Let me ask, how does women's leadership impact on the construction of this foreign policy architecture, in the Americas. There are so many examples that I fear I have to confine myself to a couple snapshots, just to remind us that we have been at this for quite some time now. Permit me to go back to my reference to Agenda 21 and recall the Global Conference on the Sustainable Development of Small Island Developing States, held in Barbados in April '94, which adopted the aptly named Barbados Program of Action for Small Island Developing States. Ambassador Lynch has already referred to Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister within the government of Prime Minister Owen Arthur, Dame Billy Miller, who led the charge at the 1994 conference, which identified priority areas and indicated the specific action that would be necessary to address the special challenges faced by small island developing states. So women's leadership and the impact on foreign policy was clearly very evident then. I think Ambassador Lynch has taken away from me the opportunity that I wanted to speak of Barbados's first woman prime minister, who has been using the world stage as a foreign policy platform to warn of what he called the existential threat from climate change, as rising sea levels, the destruction of underwater ecologies, and increasingly powerful hurricanes have the potential to destroy small island developing states. I will not mention again a viral speech at the United Nations General Assembly in New York this past September, in which she spoke to the pandemic, climate change, poverty, and food insecurity, and her November 1st address to COP26 in Glasgow. Congratulations from me also, Ambassador Lynch, to Barbados, to Her Excellency the President, Dame Sandra Mason, and to Prime Minister Motley on the country's 30th November 2021 transition to a parliamentary republic. And now to the Inter-American Commission of Women. With its long and valued history going back to its establishment in 1928, the CIM is to be congratulated for the work that it has done over the 93 years of its history and that it continues to do to advance its mission statement of shaping the public policy agenda from a rights-based perspective for the full citizenship of women and the elimination of gender-based discrimination and violence, as the Executive Secretary hinted to in her introductory remarks. In considering the impact of women's leadership on foreign policy in the Americas, one can look at the CIM as a cradle of examples. Consider the life work of Angela Acuna of Costa Rica, her country's first delegate to the CIM from 1941 to 1950, and who in September 1958 would become the first woman to be accredited as Ambassador Permanent Representative to the Organization of American States. As part of the recognition of the equality of all persons before the law, the 1949 political constitution of Costa Rica included for the first time women's right to vote. This achievement was the result of the struggle by the people of Costa Rica through organizations such as the Feminist League, which Angela Acuna co-founded in 1923. In the League, and in all the areas of public life in which she was involved, she was always a protagonist in the fight for the recognition of the active participation of women in the political, social, and cultural development of Costa Rica during the first half of the 20th century. Very much like Trinidad and Tobago's Audrey Jeffers, a social worker who in 1936 was the first woman elected to the Port of Spain City Council. In 1946 was appointed to the Legislative Council, and who was involved in founding the Union of Students in African Descent when she was a student in London, long before the expression became more well-known and quoted as it is today. Much later, after the passage of Angela Acuna through the CIM, the The mission would find itself intimately linked to a major foreign policy advancement for women in the Americas and the Caribbean, when the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women, the Convention of Belém do Pará, was adopted in 1994. The convention, as the ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago has pointed out, was the first legally binding treaty in the world to focus on eliminating gender-based violence and to proclaim that women's rights are human rights. As executive secretary of the CIM from 1986 to 1996, my dear friend Linda Poole was instrumental in contributing to the development of the Convention of Belém do Pará. I worked with Linda and others in the OAS General Secretariat when I was appointed Chief of Staff to Assistant Secretary General Luigi Einaudi in July of 2000. Among the others were Paul Spencer of Antigua and Barbuda and Christopher Hernandez Roy of Canada and Spain, still in the OAS system today. On July 25th, 2020, 3 months to the day before her death on October 28th, 2020, as we commiserated with each other on life in lockdown because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Linda wrote to me that she was fortunate not making any trips anywhere and rewriting a piece on the process to achieve the development and approval of the Convention of Belém do Pará. I do not know whether she ever managed to complete the piece. May her soul rest in eternal peace. It has been said that the leadership roles of women leaders of Barbados, Mia Motley of Trinidad and Tobago, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, and Jamaica's Portia Simpson Miller, and President Paula Mae Weeks of Trinidad and Tobago, among others, are all, in a sense, the domino effect of the political career of Dame Mary Eugenia Charles, the Caribbean's first female prime minister of Dominica from 1980 to 1995. She is credited as being the first woman in the Americas to be elected in her own right as head of government, and she established a legacy as the longest serving female prime minister in the Caribbean. She was also the world's third longest serving female prime minister, behind Indira Gandhi of India and Sirimavo Bandaranaike of Sri Lanka. Charles was born in 1919, some 31 years after Angela Acunha, and long before Dominica gained independence from the United Kingdom in 1978. She attended the University of Toronto, moved to the London School of Economics, and returning to Dominica, became the island's first female lawyer. She began campaigning in politics during the 1960s against restrictions on press freedom and helped to found the Dominica Freedom Party and was its leader from the early 1970s until 1995. Significantly, she also served as Dominica's foreign minister from 1980 to 1990 and as chairperson of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Charles became more widely known to the outside world for her clear foreign policy role in the lead up to the United States invasion of Grenada in 1983 in the wake of the arrest and execution of Grenadian Prime Minister Maurice Bishop. During her tenure as Prime Minister, Charles adopted policies that protected the poor and disadvantaged in Dominica. She supported many social welfare programs and, in keeping with international trends, also supported anti-corruption laws and individual freedom policies. For her uncompromising stance on these issues, she became known as the Iron Lady of the Caribbean. I promised a couple of snapshots, but I believe that there is no more time. Allow me, however, to mention millions of unsung women throughout the Americas whose daily toil goes largely unrecognized and in many instances unequally compensated. We all know that there is always a risk when one begins to call names. So I would like to have you indulged me in taking the risk of mentioning a couple other distinguished women, some permanent representatives to the OAS, some occupying other posts. The late Ambassador Corinne Baptiste McKnight, who was head of the Trinidad and Tobago mission in 1997 when I assumed in Washington, DC, known as a formidable chair of the CAP. Ambassador Hattie Babbitt of the United States, Ambassador Carmen Moreno de Del Cueto, then permanent representative of Mexico, who later served as executive secretary of the SIM from 2009 to 2019. Ambassador Elizabeth Astete, serving then as the minister counselor in the Peruvian mission to the OAS before being made ambassador and foreign minister of Peru from November 2020 to February 2021. Jamaican Ambassador Vilma McNish, and of Belize, Ambassador Lisa Showman. And from Haiti, not of the OAS, Maryse Pinette-Kedar, former Secretary of State for Tourism, founder and chair of the board of directors of the Progress and Development Foundation, and Danielle Saint-Lô, former Minister of Trade, Industry and Tourism, and Ambassador of the Republic of Haiti for the Emancipation of Women, all of whose life work has been a manifestation of women's leadership, contributing to the development of foreign policy in the interest of women in the Americas. Thank you very much for your very, very kind attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Honoré, for that very engaging and enlightening presentation, which highlighted, among other things, the importance in having women's leadership to help shape foreign policy and the impact that women diplomats have had here in the Americas. We appreciate the snapshots of her story, not history, her story, that you so generously highlighted. And I also would like to take this moment to thank you for the kind remarks expressed on the development of the SIM, and to offer warm greetings from the president of the SIM, who's from the Dominican Republic, Minister Mayra Jimenez. So we are deeply appreciative of your presence here today and what you shared with us. Thank you, Excellency. Before we move on to the next item on our agenda, so to speak, would you kindly, each and every one of you, open your cameras so that we can take the institutional photo of this event before moving on? And I really would appreciate your assistance in this regard as much as possible. Ambassador Anderson, Executive Secretary Mora, Ambassador Monton, would you kindly open your cameras so that we can have a photograph taken? Okay, I'm going to count to 5 to allow a few more people to join us here. Executive Secretary, Ambassador Lynch, Ambassador Monton. Okay, those are the 5 seconds. So this is the moment in history we're going to record today. After 5, we'll put on our best smiles. 5. Thank you, everyone, for that. Thank you. Appreciated. You may now return to the privacy of your shut cameras. Our final panel today will look at the gender dimensions on migration and multidimensional security in foreign policy within the framework of multidimensional security. Our 2 eminent panelists are the outgoing ambassador, permanent representative of St. Lucia to the OAS, His Excellency Anton Edmonds, who will be in dialogue with Her Excellency Maria del Carmen Roqueber, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Panama. This panel will be ably moderated by Ambassador Lacilia Prince, Chief of Staff in the Office of the OAS Secretary General. And Ambassador Prince, it is my honor and pleasure to give you the floor to proceed with the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Odlum, and thank you to the SIM for organizing this very important discussion. I learned so much in the first panel this morning. I'm adopting the protocol which has already been established, but I wish to give a very special, warm recognition to Her Excellency Sandra Honoré, who went before me in this role that I carry at the OAS as the Chief of Staff of the Assistant Secretary General, and who has laid the foundation for women's empowerment in the Secretariat. I thank you, Ambassador Honoré, for the powerful message which you brought to us this morning, evidencing the vital role which you yourself have played in advancing women's empowerment. I also take this opportunity to bring greetings from Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, who could not join us today, and who is, in fact, a very strong supporter of the work of the Organization of Women of the Americas, and who, in his role as the Assistant Secretary General, is a strong enabler of women's leadership, because his office is overwhelmingly represented with women. So, as Ms. Odlum said, our conversation is going to focus on migration. In the recent years, the Americas have seen radical changes in migration, not only an increase in the volume of migrants, but also a qualitative change in the types of migration closely linked to people's security. More people migrate as a result of situations of conflict and insecurity, as well as humanitarian emergencies. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the increase in human mobility in the hemisphere highlighted the need to address the issue in a regional and comprehensive manner. The advent of the pandemic has only served to exacerbate the situation, make it more complex. Although at the beginning of the pandemic, there was an initial decrease in human mobility, eventually we saw the impact of the economic crisis and the increase in unemployment and poverty, the contraction of economic sectors where women previously dominated, such as tourism, the weakening of the healthcare infrastructure. Notably during this time, and I've heard other speakers mention it this morning, during the same time, there was also an increase in domestic violence against women. All of these are some of the factors which cause many to see migration as their only option. Each of the member states of the OAS is called upon to formulate responses that promote just and orderly migration, seeking in particular to guarantee human rights, with emphasis on that of women and girls. In this context, I will be asking our panelists today to address the issue of migration from a foreign policy perspective, drawing on their own experience, their country's evolving positions on these issues, and the role of the OAS as a forum for discussion. The panelists have been introduced by Ms. Odlum. I am honored to be joined by Ambassador Maria del Carmen Rocobert, Permanent Representative of Panama, and His Excellency Anton Edmonds, Ambassador of St. Lucia to the OAS and to the United States. Welcome, Excellencies. It's my pleasure to have you here with me. So let's get into the conversation. And my first question is very similar to that which was posed by the first moderator, Ambassador Henry Martin, and it's the following. While advocacy for human rights, including those of women and girls, should be shouldered by everyone with a voice and with a platform, there is often the perception that this is the domain of women, and particularly of women leaders and ambassadors like yourselves. In the context of this perception, where do you see the responsibility of leadership falling in terms of protecting the rights of migrant women and girls, and how do you perceive your role in this regard, as a female ambassador, that question is no doubt for Ambassador Roquebert. Ambassador Roquebert, I invite you to take the floor, please.
Muchas gracias, embajadora Prince. Yo primero, por favor, un segundito para mostrarle mi respeto a la embajadora Honore. Hablar después de ella es un reto muy importante porque no solamente es una eminencia en la política exterior de nuestro hemisferio, sino que ha hecho un recorrido muy emocionante de lo que otras mujeres nos han legado y de alguna manera también el camino que nos falta por recorrer y que es de alguna manera también responsabilidad de todos y de todas. Embajador Philip Spencer, muchas gracias por estar aquí en su capacidad de vicepresidente del Consejo Permanente, pero sobre todo como un colega comprometido con esta causa y que nos ha recordado que la CIM tiene estos casi 95 años y hoy en día es mucho más indispensable que nunca. Alejandra Mora hace unas semanas nos señalaba que la brecha, el tiempo para cerrar esa brecha aumentó después de la pandemia 30 años y nos tomaría 132 años cerrar las desigualdades y 132 años es demasiado para la mitad de la población alcanzar la equidad. A la presidenta de la Organización de Mujeres de las Américas, señora Deborah Lynch, mis respetos, mi saludo. Y para entrar ya en la materia, la pregunta, yo creo que la responsabilidad recae y debe recaer en los y las demócratas. Creo que se trata de entender que la agenda de los derechos humanos de la mitad de la población, que somos las mujeres, es una agenda de la democracia y que nos corresponde a todas las personas que tenemos de alguna manera una posición para avanzar esos derechos, comprometernos con ellos. Por eso es que celebro que la organización de este evento haya sido en el marco de los días de activismo contra la violencia de las mujeres, pero con temas como migración, seguridad, cambio climático, que son los temas globales ahora mismo, pero que nos permiten de alguna manera reconocer que existe un impacto diferenciado, como fue evidente con la pandemia, cuando hablamos de estos temas, de seguridad multidimensional, de cambio climático, cuando hablamos de la situación de la migración. Yo creo que en el caso de Panamá, por ejemplo, tenemos a la segunda ministra de Relaciones Exteriores de nuestra historia republicana, y ella se ha encargado mucho de posicionar la política de migración desde una perspectiva de derechos humanos de las mujeres migrantes de una manera muy sólida, porque en el caso de Panamá tenemos quizás una situación de migración irregular, como bien se señaló al inicio de la nota introductoria, que está sobrepasando todas las expectativas posibles. En Panamá, por ejemplo, antes de la pandemia, tuvimos un flujo migratorio de cerca de 20,000 personas. Este año 2021 estamos esperando cerrar con 150,000 personas en tránsito por nuestro país, comprendiendo además que el paso por Panamá es uno de los tramos quizás más peligrosos porque incluye el tránsito del sur al norte, la selva del Darién, que es un área peligrosa, es un área complicada, es un área inhóspita. Y para ponerles un ejemplo muy claro, hace unas semanas salía un titular en las noticias que no cabían en la morgue de Darién la cantidad de cuerpos que estaban, pues. O sea, no tenía capacidad la morgue para albergar las personas fallecidas en tránsito irregular. Entonces, cuando hablamos de migración, flujos migratorios irregulares, estamos hablando de problemas de nuestra región que no van a parar en el corto plazo. Por eso es que desde una organización como la Organización de Estados Americanos nos corresponde discutir este tema como prioridad pero precisamente entender que existe un impacto diferenciado en mujeres y en niñas que sufren sobre todo violencia sexual, que sufren sobre todo situaciones que por las mismas características y necesidades cuando están en estado de embarazo, cuando están atravesando estos lugares, tienen necesidades especiales. Entonces, cuando nos volvemos a la pregunta si nos corresponde solamente a las mujeres embajadoras, no, nos corresponde a todos y cada uno de los que estamos vinculados a función diplomática, a la función pública, porque se trata de una agenda de la democracia de nuestros países, atenderlo desde una perspectiva de género. Y aquí solamente quiero hacer un breve señalamiento en cuanto a veces tenemos miedo a las palabras, ¿no? Política feminista, política exterior feminista, lo mejor parece que tiene un contenido peyorativo, cuando de lo que se trata es de incorporar una visión y una perspectiva a los derechos humanos de la mitad de la población. Lo dejo aquí por ahora para ver si podemos en las siguientes preguntas incorporar otros elementos desde la perspectiva de Panamá. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rockeberg. I was jarred by one of the first things you said, which was the 132-year time frame to close the gender gap. And certainly that would not happen in my lifetime, but just to contemplate that it wouldn't happen in the lifetime of my children either, both of whom are under the age of 5, that really brings to the fore the need for persons such as yourself to use your platform, to use your voice, to bring awareness and to see how collectively we can narrow that gap, just chip away at it bit by bit. So thank you very much for your words. I would also pose the same question to Ambassador Edmonds. How do you see your role, sir, as a male ambassador? Why do you think it's important for men to be equally vocal on these issues?
Thank you, Ambassador Prince. I promise everybody this is going to be the last time that you see me speaking at an OAS event, in as much as I last week indicated my departure to all of you formally. So I thank you for even allowing me in the room. Protocol having been established, I do want to recognize Ambassador Honore, basically an ambassador upon whose footsteps many of us follow in terms of service to the country and service to the region. I think one of the things that I want to focus on a little bit in this is that the issue of gender equality and gender issues, migration or otherwise, and how we address it as societies transcends women ambassadors. And now let me be clear, I believe, so maybe I'm on the way out, so I can state a little more openly my own personal beliefs versus my country's position. But I think we continue to be archaic societies in many respects. In St. Lucia, for example, there have been more women involved in foreign affairs in my country. There have been more female representatives who have represented us during my career in terms of ambassadors to CARICOM, in terms of ambassadors elsewhere. From a numerical perspective, women will serve St. Lucia longest as ambassadors to the US, the OAS, and the UN, considering the recent appointments to Washington, DC, and New York. Throughout my the ministry, from the PSs all the way through, we have a deep cadre of people who lead and who are women. But that said, one of the elements that I think we have to face and we have to be honest about is that being an ambassador sounds great, but let's be clear. For the most part, we are spokespeople for policies made at home, and unfortunately at times are not party to the policy-making process. Gender issues, be it in foreign affairs or otherwise, are still too often driven by deep-rooted societal norms that need to be broken. Yes, we have a role. I would say that our role is obviously to advocate and to remind our countries as to where we are versus our hemisphere or the globe. But the harsh reality is that more often than not, we do not necessarily carry the day as it relates to the creation of policy, which would ensure and guarantee the gender equity and equality that we're speaking about. I think that, and I'll close with this, is that if there's any fear by any of my peers and colleagues in my country and elsewhere on focusing on the issue of gender, this is not just a foreign affairs issue. This is throughout our societies, and it's something that we need to spend a lot more time educating our population at large and rooting out the inequalities that are embedded in many of our societies.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Well, one of the first things I'd like to say to you is that I'm very glad that you're with us. And I certainly hope that you would use your voice. You have a very powerful voice, and your views are always very well respected. And I do hope that you use whatever remains of your tenure down to the very last day that you're permanent representative to the OAS to help us advance this and other policies of the organization. What you mentioned about there being many female representatives in foreign policy, but that a lot of the actual policies are shaped elsewhere, I think that that is indicative of the need to have more grassroots involvement from civil society in the member states, and that eventually gets translated into policies that the governments themselves adopt and which are executed by their diplomatic representatives. My next question turns to environmental migration. Disaster, displacement, and environmental migration are among the most serious humanitarian challenges facing the Caribbean. We have seen the ravages of natural disasters in the Caribbean and Central America. Just this year alone, we've seen St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which Ambassador Gilher spoke about earlier, Haiti, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua. Those are just some examples. It is critical to understand how the consequences of environmental migration and disaster displacement are gendered in order to address and prevent harm and to protect the rights of the most vulnerable, that is, women and girls who experience intersecting forms of discrimination. So I will open up this question to both of you, Your Excellencies. What are your thoughts on how the international community can address the gender implications of environmental migration, and what concretely can be done? I leave that to whoever wishes to take the floor first.
¿O yo?
Ladies.
Sí. Bueno, yo creo que es importante cuando se pregunta por medidas concretas, analizar lo que acabas de plantear en la misma pregunta. Para que existan medidas concretas, de alguna manera tiene que haber políticas claras, establecidas, que incorporen estos elementos, y también tiene que haber voluntad política para que se implementen esas medidas concretas. Es decir, las medidas no están como en el aire. Las medidas vienen de alguna manera sobre políticas que han sido establecidas y que no dependen solamente de quien esté en el puesto, sino que se genere una institucionalidad que se haga cargo de manera permanente y sostenida de esas necesidades diferenciadas, de ese impacto diferenciado en este tipo de situaciones como desastres naturales o cambios climáticos. Cuando existe una emergencia, corremos a hacernos cargo de manera inmediata de cómo lidiar con el problema. Pero si comprendemos que esto no es un hecho aislado, sino que se trata de una situación real, como cambio climático, que la ciencia determina que esto no va a parar, que la afectación de estados del Caribe y sobre todo centroamericanos como los nuestros, como acaba el año pasado ocurrir, no solamente con el caso de San Vincent y las Granadinas, sino con las afectaciones por los huracanes en Centroamérica. no debemos solo prepararnos para la emergencia, sino comprender que existe un estado de emergencia social permanente en algunos de nuestros estados que nos obligan a hacernos cargo con una institucionalidad social que acompañe la emergencia y que de alguna manera también prevenga las situaciones como las que vamos a seguir viviendo. O sea, Panamá podemos decir que toma en serio el cambio climático. De hecho, es uno de los 3 países en el mundo carbono negativo, junto con Surinam y Sudán. Panamá también cumplió el 30x30 de protección de sus océanos 9 años antes de lo que debía cumplirlo. Tiene toda una política de atención de cambio climático y de atención de los desastres naturales. Sin embargo, lo que necesitamos es que esto incorpore de alguna manera lo necesario para quienes son las poblaciones más impactadas y que pueda establecerse los cordones de protección social necesarios ante estos impactos. De alguna manera lo que quiero tratar de indicar es que no podemos solamente seguir con las grandes líneas, ¿verdad?, de cumplimiento de metas, sino, como nuestra ministra siempre ha planteado, un poco el accountability de todos nuestros países, porque las afectaciones no son locales, sino son globales. Por lo tanto, lo que es necesario es establecer una red común que nos permita hacernos cargo de manera permanente de esto. Y cuando planteo un poco de que lo concreto parte de la política y de voluntad también, lo quiero indicar es que pasa un gobierno y no puede borrarse todo lo que se ha avanzado, sino que se trata de compromisos para políticas de Estado que permitan la construcción de una institucionalidad sostenible que impulse medidas concretas en el largo plazo. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and congratulations to Panama on its carbon neutrality. That is excellent and a model for others to follow. And certainly I agree with you that the political will is needed for us to ensure that the policies that are in place to address climate change and the impact of migration, that those are taken on board by everyone. I now invite Ambassador Edmonds to share his thoughts on this question, please.
Thanks, Ambassador. I think, unfortunately, environmental migration joins with other push factors for migration. So I'm not diminishing it, because obviously it's a major issue, and it's going to continue to be a major issue for all of us. You referenced the Caribbean and Central America. But when you look at environmental migration, you look at the issues of crime, you look at the issues of lack of economic opportunities, and you start to bundle them together. It's chilling. It's chilling because in many respects, we're losing everybody. There's this argument made years ago that, for example, in the case of Jamaica, that Jamaica was losing 2/3 of nurses to better opportunities on the outside. That applies to a country like St. Lucia, maybe not at that level, but it applies throughout for Caribbean countries. When you talk about the issue of women, notably, and yes, this is traditionally when you talk about migration, even coming up through Latin America into the United States, but even within the region, interregional migration. You're talking about the issue of women more so than men traveling with children, women more so than men being trafficked. At the end of the day, environmental migration exposes women and children to the vagaries of, or the dark side of humanity. It exposes everybody who's trying to migrate, especially irregularly, but notably women and children. And women will not leave their children, so they're even more susceptible to the bad actors within our societies. you know, one of the things that jumped out at me, and I must say it was based on a certain amount of ignorance, is that you long hear the story that it's the male, it's the man who leaves, who migrates, who basically goes off to find a better job, to then turn back and send money home to the family and to the kids. And the facts are that it's closer to 50, well, it's over 50% in the Caribbean. In Latin America, it's just under 50%. And the numbers in terms of the money coming back is that women send back the same amount of money as men in proportion. It may be that men make more money on the outside and as a result send back more, but in terms of the proportion of the percentage of what they make. The long and the short of it is that it's a horrible situation for us to be in as developing countries, as countries who are fraying at the edges in terms of our societies, and then to lose people, to lose matriarchs, to lose and you know, I use under acknowledged in terms of the fact that in many of our rural communities, it is women who hold our families together. It is women who basically are the ones who are keeping the community together. So ultimately, what we're looking at, be it environmental migration, be it as a result of crime, economic opportunities, we're looking at some of our own failures as policymakers in terms of providing enough supports and inputs to keep our populations within. Obviously, we're succumbing to the pressures of climate change and of everything else. But the long-term prognosis is not a positive one. When we look at the fact that we may end up having many of us may end up having more people on the outside than on the inside, that our diaspora is larger than the home community. There's still a country to run. There's still people to be educated. There's still society to be protected. So my worry is that we're running out of time as governments and as countries to get our proverbial act together to ensure that we can address the issue of climate change, but we can also address the other push factors that are driving so many people out of our societies for that better life that they seek on the outside.
Thank you, Ambassador. You've touched on two other points that I wanted to get to, two other questions that I have. You talked about the push-pull factors and you talked about the net migration. And both of you, ambassadors, you represent countries where there is you have negative migration, you have more people going out. Certainly, when I was ambassador of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I remembered learning from my prime minister the estimated statistics of Vincentians, persons who are entitled to Vincentian citizenship. And it was astounding, significantly larger than the population that lives in the country itself. So I'm curious to know, where does the subject of migration and diaspora communities feature in your country's national foreign policy agenda? How are they addressing it? And to what extent that foreign policy or policies that you have, to what extent is the gender dimension prominent? How is it featured in your policies? Again, that question to both of you, whoever chooses to go first, I'm fine with that. I think you wanted to go ahead, Ambassador Edmonds. It appears that way.
Well, you see, this is where you defer to where you were trained, ladies first, and you're in a conversation about gender and you don't want to be. So,
completely understood.
well, look, I mean, I think on the migrating out, I mean, clearly we need to do better within our societies, and we need to figure out how do we balance the economy, or how do we revamp or retool our economies so that there is this sort of equitable space for everyone to be productive and to be able to stay home. And I don't know what that solution is. I mean, that's why I'm a lowly ambassador versus a minister somewhere or a prime minister, really and truly with the brain power to try to manage that mechanism. I think on the migration through, on the migration in, is one of the things that I've focused a fair amount of attention on recently. The OAS has done a fair amount of work, obviously, SIM and others, in terms of migration and looking at ways in which we as countries could welcome migrants into our societies, could basically, maybe even in the case of some of us who are losing people, that we could basically tap into a grouping of people who are coming in and incorporate them into our society. And I'll tell you the truth, I have struggled with that concept in a sense, if only because countries like mine, we are weak in terms of data collection. We are weak in terms of the services that we provide for migrants. We are even weak in terms of legislation that we have in place, which would allow people to migrate into our societies. And then, of course, societally, considering where we are economically right now, COVID, in terms of the economic downturn, you have this societal push back towards those who would want to migrate into our communities. I mean, the history of the Caribbean, our own history within the Caribbean in terms of migration has not necessarily been positive. We have looked askance at many of our own in terms of their movement into our various societies. And most troubling on that end is the trafficking in person side of the equation. So we talk about migration writ large, but the trafficking in person side of the equation is the one where I think many of us are probably even weakest in terms of, and that sort of ties a little bit into the whole multidimensional security element of things, is that we don't prosecute effectively. Once again, we don't track the migration of people through our borders as aggressively as we should. In the case of St. Lucia, intriguing for me was during the whole issue of COVID was when we started talking about repatriating St. Lucians who had been around the world. We found, of course, migration. I mean, and you know, and the question is it migration or not? You had a bunch of St. Lucians coming from Martinique, back and forth. And then our tracking mechanism, the argument was, well, they're actually nationals who are in Martinique illegally. So these are not necessarily people migrating. So you get into this hodgepodge of problems where our best efforts are still weak as it relates to data, and our best efforts are still weak as it relates to being welcoming societies, and also societies which would clamp down on the illegal movement of the most vulnerable, notably in trafficking in persons, notably women.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Rockebert.
Bueno, sí, perdón, me voy a apoyar en las respuestas del embajador, de mi querido embajador Edmond, porque creo que ha tocado él algo muy importante cuando se refería a la feminización de la migración y cómo en nuestra región, América, o sea, el Caribe y Latinoamérica, se había incrementado la migración de mujeres en relación a lo que tradicionalmente conocíamos como los hombres buscando mejores oportunidades, pero se refirió también al tema de luego las remesas, cómo se veía la quizá diferencia que nos trae luz sobre otro problema de precarización o trabajos más precarios que tienen las mujeres luego, o de alguna manera que son víctimas también de más violencia las mujeres migrantes. Y creo que es importante destacar que 1 de cada 5 mujeres desplazadas o refugiadas han experimentado violencia y que también se han incrementado el número de migrantes, niños, niñas y embarazadas. Con lo cual ahí también vemos que cuando se aborda el tema de la migración y de políticas migratorias con enfoque de género, tenemos que ir incorporando lo que también mencionaba mi colega de seguridad multidimensional, el trata de personas, cómo son de alguna manera atrapadas mujeres y niñas en estas redes de tráfico de personas vinculadas a la explotación laboral y sexual. Lo que quiero plantear es que es mucho más complejo y necesario el abordaje que debe darse al tema de la migración en nuestros países. Panamá es un país de tránsito. Nosotros hemos estado acostumbrados a recibir de todas las nacionalidades. Eso es parte de nuestro sello de identidad. Lo que me parece, y nos hemos organizado de alguna manera como país para recibir. No salimos tanto, recibimos. Pero en este caso estamos hablando de un tipo de migración que no se queda. Es un tipo de migración que está buscando hacia el norte y que está de alguna manera siendo presa de organizaciones criminales en la región. La migración que está pasando por Panamá no se queda, y Panamá es el único de los países de la región que tiene una medida cautelar de la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, que nos obliga a establecer unos estándares que no se comparten en la región. ¿Qué estamos queriendo hacer desde el Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores, y que la ministra se ha convertido de alguna manera un advocacy en la región sobre esto? Que necesitamos estandarizar incluso en términos de protección de los derechos humanos el paso de los migrantes en toda la región, desde el sur hasta el norte, y de alguna manera hacernos cargo también de las condiciones de ese tránsito por todos nuestros países, pero también empezar a conversar sobre las raíces profundas y estructurales de esa migración. Por ello, en el mes de agosto se convocó una cumbre en Panamá, o sea, virtual, en la que participaron 9 cancilleres, para que nos empezáramos a sentar y poner sobre la mesa cómo vamos a abordar esto, porque llega un momento en nuestros países pequeños que en algunos pueblos hay más migrantes que locales, y empiezan a crearse algunas situaciones que pueden degenerar en problemas de xenofobia, en problemas de conflictividad que no son normales, o sea, no son naturales en Panamá, siendo un país acostumbrado a recibir y un país de multidiversidad. Y el follow-up a esta reunión fue una reunión de procuradores generales de la región, porque el tema de la migración tiene necesariamente que verse con una forma articulada de trabajar el crimen organizado en la región, porque la migración irregular tiene un componente muy importante de crimen organizado y debe por eso verse desde esa perspectiva, con un enfoque de género que incorpore esta atención y protección a las niñas y mujeres víctimas de violencia sexual, que por las medidas que Panamá tiene, medidas cautelares que tiene, se han creado estos 2 centros de recepción de migrantes y refugiados en cada uno de los extremos de las fronteras, para poder brindar estas medidas integrales a todos en general, pero particularmente a niñas y mujeres. Gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador. I stand corrected on what I said earlier with the negative migration. I did not realize that that's not the case for Panama, so thank you for that. I think I will go, given the time that we have. I wanted to ask a question about the host countries, if that's a question that perhaps the 2 of you can perhaps answer quickly. I wanted to quickly ask a question about how can host countries work with other nations to address the push-pull factors that impact migratory flows. You spoke from the perspective of a transit country, Ambassador Rockefeller, but I do have another question that I want to get to after, but if you would please give me your thoughts on how host countries can work more closely with countries of origin, both you and Ambassador Edmonds. Thank you. Your microphone is muted.
Como he planteado, en el caso panameño, en estos momentos estamos muy enfocados a la atención de esta situación de flujos migratorios irregulares. Por supuesto, nuestro trabajo conjunto más profundo y directo se está desarrollando con nuestros vecinos, Costa Rica y Panamá, y Costa Rica y Colombia, porque necesitamos articularnos para que esto no sea una situación que se nos convierta en un problema también de seguridad interna. Pero De alguna manera, creo que estamos planteándonos una ruta crítica con países de la región para que sea atendido no solamente el flujo en estos momentos, sino también las causas estructurales con las que debemos lidiar también. Como mencionaba el embajador Edmond, aquí tenemos que ver también las condiciones socioeconómicas y la recuperación de la pandemia, cómo vamos a trabajarla de manera conjunta. Las situaciones de pobreza multidimensional que están afectando a cada uno de nuestros países. El flujo migratorio ha existido, existe. La situación es cómo vamos a hacer que en todo el tránsito sea desde la perspectiva de protección de derechos. Gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Edmonds, would you like to jump in?
I mean, I would say it's a lesser issue for us currently, but in terms of who do we work with, obviously within CARICOM, within the region, we do need to work a little bit better as it relates to the communicating of information, of data, of trends. I think for us, a little while back, our concern was the surprise for us was migration from Venezuela, for example. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the bigger issues for small countries, especially, I think for all of us, but and Ambassador Rookwood mentioned this, is the security dynamic of it. Is ultimately the concern that I think we all face is that parties coming into the assumption that parties coming into your country for the most part, not well-intentioned, or that when they do come into your society, they provide certain stresses and strains. The country from which they come, I mean, and now what we're seeing is we're seeing people coming in from all over the world, kind of thing, making their way throughout the hemisphere and one by one landing on our shores. It's almost impossible for us to deal with the place they're trying to go. So the place they're trying to go is to Canada or to the United States. They have to get on a plane. In our case, so the difficulty and the horror of that, of course, is that one person gets on a plane and they land somewhere, and then you're almost shut down in terms of being a place where migrants are coming through. So it's not as big an issue for countries that are linked together, but it is an issue with a porous borders as most of us islands have. It is an issue that we're going to have to pay a lot more attention to.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. I am going to launch into the last question because I believe we're short on time now. And through various studies, roundtables, and projects, SIM continually seeks to address many policy issues through a gender-based lens without running the risk of creating marginalization of men. And I've heard Ambassador Gilchrist mention that, and that's something that's important to me. So without running the risk of creating marginalization to men, do you think that there is scope for the OAS to create an overall balanced, gender-based foreign policy? Can the member states, excuse me, work towards, and I see that quizzical expression on your face, Ambassador Edmonds, work towards an overall balanced, gender-based foreign policy? If so, what would be the best available tools, channels, and mechanisms to achieve that?
Bueno, empiezo yo ahora. Tú,
Okay.
dale tú. Perdón. Bueno, yo cuando hablamos de balance siempre me pregunto si se trata de realizar los derechos humanos de hombres y mujeres, ¿no sé, es el balance que estamos aspirando? La CIM es la punta de lanza en nuestra región de casi los derechos al sufragio de casi todos nuestros países. Y tiene 95 años. En mi país cumplimos este año 75 años del sufragio femenino. Yo soy la primera mujer representante permanente de Panamá aquí. Por eso es que siempre lo he dicho desde que llegué, yo estoy aquí porque otras mujeres abrieron ese camino y a mí me toca abrir camino para otras mujeres. Cuando yo entré a la Facultad de Derecho de mi país, no había ni una mujer magistrada de la Corte Suprema de Justicia. La primera llegó en 1985. Este gobierno ha designado 4 mujeres magistradas en la Corte Suprema de Justicia y por primera vez en la historia de mi país vamos a tener más mujeres que hombres a partir del 1 de enero en la Corte Suprema de Justicia. ¿Eso es balance? Sí. Ahora podemos hablar de balance. Creo que cuando nos planteamos qué podemos hacer desde la OEA, hace 2 años, antes de la pandemia, el último día que estuvimos en el Consejo Permanente, logramos por consenso, la resolución de consenso que se lograba desde 1916, la logramos en el 2019. Y era la resolución para el avance de la paridad a lo interno de la OEA. Y se le daba ese mandato a la CIM de trabajar de manera conjunta con la Secretaría General para que lográsemos paridad a lo interno de la OEA. Porque esa es la aspiración de esta organización y la de cada uno de los Estados miembros de esta organización. Que esa política equilibrada signifique necesariamente que la mitad de la población esté representada y con capacidad para realizar los derechos humanos de cada una de las mujeres y niñas de nuestros países. Que se puede, claro que se puede, ya lo hemos hecho antes. Lo que nuevamente, las acciones concretas solamente parten de la política y de la voluntad política. Aquí encontrarán siempre a esta servidora para seguir trabajando en esa dirección. Muchas gracias.
I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, Ambassador. Ambassador Edmonds, I'm very curious to hear your perspectives as well.
Well, my quizzical eye was really towards the significant focus, and I know that's the umbrella under this in terms of foreign policy. I mean, I think that the bottom line is that we need SIM to be involved throughout society. I think a singular focus on foreign policy it's not a mistake, but as I mentioned, foreign policy is a derivative of societal engagement. So I give you an example. I look at the issue of security. When I look at the security apparatus within St. Lucia and security apparatus that I've sort of dealt with, how many women are there actively involved in that space? Not enough. How many women are there actively involved dealing with the issue of, let's say, trafficking in persons? Not enough. How many police officers are effectively trained to deal with the gender issue domestically, but also even as it relates to migrants? Not enough. So I look at the SIM's role as, yes, foreign policy is one, but SIM's role in fully questioning whether throughout our society, in our ministries of equity, in our ministries of economic development, that we have embedded in those ministries strong enough best practices, or we're sharing strong enough best practices throughout, that at the end of the day, that ends up ensuring that we have societies that are fully functional, because they're not right now, they're atrophied in many respects. And by having societies that are fully functional, that this equality and equity is built in. It's not just in legislation that we pass, but it's actually built into the system, and people are fully represented. Then it becomes part and parcel of foreign policy. And I'll close with that. Once again, just a reminder that us as representatives, as advocates for foreign policy and for the inclusion of women, that's a singular, but that's a very small subset. A whole of society approach is where an entity like SIM has a more effective role to play.
Thank you, Ambassador. I totally agree with you on those perspectives. It's from the ground up, a whole of society, and then you get to the foreign policy and execute. So that's been very insightful for me. That's my final question, but I also wanted to invite both of you, Ambassador Rockebert and Ambassador Edmonds, if you have any other additional thoughts that you wanted to share, I would invite you to do so now. Nothing from Ambassador Edmonds, Ambassador Rockebert.
Yo sí quiero...
Yes.
Yo quería traer, quizás poner también sobre la mesa una situación particular de la propia diversidad de nuestros países, ¿no? En el caso panameño, yo tuve experiencia directa en otro momento de mi carrera pública, por decirlo así, de tratar lo que es la migración interna por el tema de la población, migración indígena por las cosechas. O sea, la relación binacional que hemos trabajado Costa Rica y Panamá por la migración histórica para la recolección de café, etcétera, es importante también traerlo sobre la mesa. O sea, cuando hablamos de migración no estamos hablando solamente de la transfronteriza de alguna manera en esto de búsqueda de mejores oportunidades en el futuro, sino una tradicional, una que es perversa, si se quiere de alguna manera, que tiene que ver también con las propias estructuras de nuestros países, las estructuras económicas de nuestros países. Y eso quizás para otro momento, pero quería nada más tenerlo como también la perspectiva de género es importante en estos problemas que son tan locales, pero tan históricamente vinculados a las grandes desigualdades sociales de nuestros países.
Well, thank you very much for those closing thoughts, Ambassador. This has been a very rich discussion. I too have learned quite a lot. I'm sure that our audience did. I've seen a lot of comments popping up on the chat, although I've not been able to read them, but it's been a very engaging discussion. It shows the very important role that the SIM has to play in the organization and in our hemisphere. I mentioned earlier how stunned I was by the reference to the 132-year time frame to close the gender gap. And the subject of migration, every aspect of it that I heard discussed touches and concerns every single pillar of the OAS: human rights, democracy, development, security, which makes SIM's role super relevant. And of course, we would expect that the Permanent Council would treat this issue with the importance that it deserves. So I have no further words to add other than to thank you, Ambassador Rockebert, and to thank you, Ambassador Edmonds, for joining us. As always, it's important to have the voice of the men as well in this conversation. I want to congratulate the work of the SIM and that of Ambassador Mora Mora and her staff, her team. And before I close, I really do want to say special thanks to Ambassador Edmonds for his support of the work of the SIM, his support of all of the areas of the organization. He did say his farewell to the Permanent Council last week, and I take this opportunity on behalf of the Secretariat to thank you very much, sir, for your support of our work and for the success of your tenure as St. Lucia's ambassador. And we wish you very well in your future endeavors. Now I offer the floor back to Ms. Odlum.
Thank you very, very much, Ambassador Prince, for your skillful, erudite, and informed moderation of this riveting dialogue that we had between our distinguished Caribbean and Latin American ambassadors represented here. It was just so thought-provoking. I mean, Ambassador Edmonds, we know that you're on your way out, but you definitely have left quite a legacy here. And on behalf of the SIM, I want to thank you for all the ways in which you have encouraged us to be much more engaging of the Caribbean and much more engaging of practical solutions to the work that we do. So we are definitely very, very happy to have had you here today. Ambassador Rookbear, your interventions were nothing short of brilliant, and I really appreciated all that you shared with us here today. Like Ambassador Prince, I learned so much today, and even in the comments, we have heard how excellent the discussions have been. And I hope that the ambassadors will also be here with us as we invite questions and answers later, because we have at least 2 questions that we'd like to pose to all of you. So we were quite enlightened by the contributions so far, all of them, and all of these contributions have helped pivot us beautifully to our next presentation on making feminist foreign policy. To do the honors, we have with us Her Excellency Ambassador Carmen Monton, Permanent Observer Ambassador of Spain to the OAS, and a former Minister of Health, Consumer Affairs, and Social Welfare in Spain. Ambassador Monton, with much pleasure, I give you the floor to address us on this very forward-looking and very timely topic. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Por el tiempo voy a saltarme los saludos protocolarios, pero sí que quiero agradecer la invitación a participar en mi calidad de embajadora observadora permanente de España ante la OEA en este segundo evento, que espero que haya un tercero, junto con un grupo de mujeres que tienen el compromiso y convencimiento de la defensa de la igualdad. Al grupo de mujeres también se han sumado hombres, así que los felicito por ello. Si me permiten, quiero trasladarles un sentimiento de doble hermandad. La hermandad que siente España con América Latina y el Caribe, y también de sororidad con todas las mujeres y con todas las colegas embajadoras de la OEA y del mismo modo con todas las mujeres y niñas de esta región. La humanidad tiene una deuda histórica inmensa, acuciante e inaplazable con la mitad de la población, con las mujeres y con las niñas, que de una vez por todas deben tener garantizados sus derechos y libertades. La consecución de la igualdad de género sigue siendo el gran reto pendiente, la tarea inacabada de nuestro tiempo. Tras la conmemoración del 25 aniversario de la Declaración y Plataforma de Acción de Beijing y el 20 aniversario de la Resolución 1325 del Consejo de Seguridad de Naciones Unidas sobre Mujeres, Paz y Seguridad, debemos seguir trabajando. Es cierto que en las últimas décadas se han producido avances gracias a la puesta en práctica de políticas de progreso e igualdad, pero los datos globales alertan de una persistente desigualdad y el COVID-19 ha marcado el camino del retroceso. En ese sentido, en la superación de la pandemia y la reconstrucción post-COVID debemos integrar la idea de que la igualdad entre mujeres y hombres es sinónimo de progreso y riqueza económica, de prosperidad, de diversidad y de justicia. Hago alusión a algunas preguntas que han ido surgiendo a lo largo de la mañana y quiero añadir sobre ellas, sobre el papel de las mujeres en la política y en la acción exterior feminista y en la consecución de la igualdad, que la responsabilidad del cambio de la igualdad es colectiva, es de los hombres y de las mujeres. Y tiene que ver con el feminismo, con la justicia social, con el progreso de nuestras sociedades, con el respeto y la garantía de los derechos humanos y con la democracia. Así que en ese contexto considero que es en el que tenemos que abordar todas las políticas de presente y de futuro. Hoy se me ha convocado para, en esta jornada que se ocupa del empoderamiento de las mujeres y la promoción de la igualdad de género a través de la política exterior, y que además está dentro del contexto de estos 16 días de trabajo y de visibilidad de la lucha contra la violencia de género, para hablar de la política exterior feminista de España y el compromiso del Gobierno de España con una diplomacia feminista. Con el compromiso explícito de desarrollar una política exterior feminista, España incorpora la igualdad de género en nuestras políticas e instrumentos de acción exterior, incluida la cooperación al desarrollo. La diplomacia feminista española representa la necesaria coherencia entre la política nacional y la acción exterior del Estado. Es reflejo en el plano internacional de la apuesta del Gobierno de España, de Pedro Sánchez, por la igualdad y los derechos de las mujeres, así como el cumplimiento de nuestros compromisos internacionales con la Agenda 2030 y el cumplimiento del Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible número 5. España se ha comprometido y se ha convertido en un referente a nivel internacional por su marco normativo y sus políticas públicas en numerosos ámbitos, de los que menciono especialmente la lucha contra la violencia de género, la igualdad de género en el ámbito laboral y en políticas de conciliación o los presupuestos con impacto de género. La diplomacia feminista quiere contribuir a hacer realidad un mundo más justo, en el que mujeres y hombres sean iguales en derechos y oportunidades, así de sencillo, pero a la vez así de complejo. Con nuestra acción exterior feminista, España se suma a los países de vanguardia que incorporan la igualdad de género, el empoderamiento de las mujeres y niñas y la lucha contra la violencia machista como elemento distintivo de su política exterior. Seguimos los pasos de Suecia, que fue el primer país en el mundo en asumir públicamente una política exterior feminista de la mano de un gobierno socialdemócrata ya en 2014. Déjeme que comparta con ustedes las líneas de acción de nuestra política exterior feminista que se resumen en tan solo 5 puntos. El primero, mujeres, paz y desarrollo. El segundo, violencia contra las mujeres y niñas. Y hago un inciso en este apartado, porque también a lo largo de la mañana se ha estado exponiendo las consecuencias de la migración forzosa por muchas cuestiones, por razones de cambio climático, por crisis en los diferentes países. Y aquí creo que hay que tener especial atención al fenómeno de la trata y de la prostitución para no condenar a tantas y tantas hermanas, mujeres de países en vías de desarrollo que se ven empujadas a salir forzosamente de su hogar a la trata y a la prostitución. En esta labor saben que también especialmente pueden contar con el compromiso de España. El tercer punto son los derechos humanos de mujeres y niñas. El cuarto, la participación de mujeres en espacio de toma de decisiones, en el que especialmente colaboramos con la CIM, y si después hay tiempo haré una referencia un poco más extensa. Y en quinto lugar, la justicia económica y el empoderamiento de las mujeres. Y estas 5 líneas de acción las abordamos siguiendo 5 principios rectores. El primero es el enfoque transformativo, en el que toda la acción realizada desde España se incorpora el enfoque de género de forma transversal y sistemática. El segundo, con un liderazgo comprometido como el que estamos ejerciendo. El tercero, con la apropiación. Las personas que ocupamos puestos de liderazgo tenemos la responsabilidad inapelable, específica, de promover la igualdad de género en todos los ámbitos donde nos encontremos. El cuarto, la participación inclusiva y el fomento de alianzas con todos los actores que puedan contribuir a lograr avances concretos y durables, y reforzar canales de participación con la sociedad civil, el sector privado, la academia, centros de pensamiento, instituciones, etcétera, y en redes internacionales. Aquí yo quiero subrayar la alianza con la sociedad civil, con esas organizaciones feministas, esas organizaciones de mujeres, esas organizaciones de defensa de los derechos de las mujeres, porque son un motor imprescindible para hacer posible esa participación inclusiva y para hacer posible los avances en igualdad. Y por último, la interseccionalidad y la diversidad, porque no es posible avanzar en la situación real de las mujeres y niñas sin tener en cuenta que, que las discriminaciones pueden ser múltiples. Y me detengo un instante en recordar que las mujeres sufren discriminación por el hecho de ser mujeres, pero además pueden sufrirla por su origen étnico o racial, orientación sexual o identidad de género, estatus económicos, creencias religiosas, discapacidad o lugar de origen, entre otros muchos. Además, quiero referirme en concreto a la diplomacia multilateral que desarrollamos desde España. Nuestro objetivo es lograr doblar el mayor peso de los asuntos en materia de género en el seno de las organizaciones internacionales, ya sea mejorando la colaboración con otros países en este ámbito, apoyando candidaturas que promuevan esta prioridad o asegurando la integración del enfoque de género en los instrumentos de financiación. España además apoya y da seguimiento a los planes en materia de igualdad de género de las organizaciones internacionales de las que forma parte y lidera iniciativas estratégicas en el ámbito de igualdad de género en el marco de la acción global en el futuro, como puede ser, por ejemplo, en el ámbito de Naciones Unidas. Hago referencia también en el ámbito multilateral, aunque sea en nuestra calidad de observadores, a nuestro trabajo en la OEA, nuestra estrecha colaboración con la Comisión Interamericana de Mujeres, y aprovecho para reiterar públicamente nuevamente la felicitación por su labor y señalar pues, nuestro trabajo cotidiano en el liderazgo político a través de los cursos de candidatas que financiamos, por decir algún ejemplo. Y también quiero nombrar el trabajo del MESECBI y de la CIDH porque nos parecen que también son fundamentales. Y brevemente hago referencia a la cooperación internacional para el desarrollo sostenible, que marca el cumplimiento de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, el número 5 de la Agenda 2030, como una prioridad del quinto plan director de la cooperación española y también de la estrategia de respuesta conjunta de la cooperación española a la crisis del COVID-19. España apoya políticas públicas de igualdad y erradicación de la violencia contra las mujeres. De igual modo, acompaña a organizaciones de mujeres y feministas en innumerables proyectos. España ha hecho suyo el compromiso de la Unión Europea de que al menos el 85% de las acciones de cooperación al desarrollo tengan como objetivo principal o relevante el empoderamiento de las mujeres y niñas y la igualdad de género. Sin dejar de mencionar, en último lugar, la diplomacia pública con la que buscamos consolidar el papel de España como país líder y comprometido en la aplicación de políticas de igualdad y seguir manteniendo en el ámbito internacional la igualdad en la agenda social, institucional y política. Concluyo ya diciendo que la prevalencia de la desigualdad entre mujeres y hombres, una prevalencia que se ha visto aumentada en el contexto de la pandemia, pone de relieve la necesidad de intensificar el esfuerzo para cerrar las brechas de género. En ese contexto, la política exterior española, la política exterior feminista, quiere contribuir a avanzar hacia la igualdad real y efectiva en el plano internacional. Me despido con una referencia a mi país. No sé si saben, pero hoy estamos de celebración. Hoy es el día en el que en España se conmemora los 43 años de la aprobación de nuestra Constitución. Y nuestra democracia es joven, pero sólida. Y quiero compartir con ustedes este día de especial emoción para nuestra joven democracia, diciendo que la democracia no puede defraudar a las mujeres, ni dentro ni fuera de mi país. Tengamos presentes que en nuestro trabajo cotidiano, los embajadores y las embajadoras que aquí estamos en el ámbito de la OEA, en nuestro trabajo en favor de la paz, el desarrollo inclusivo y sostenible, los derechos humanos y la democracia, como así es en este espacio multilateral de la OEA, en el que España se honra en ser el primer país observador, Sin igualdad, nada será posible. No de forma plena, no de forma real, no de forma efectiva. Así que, queridos colegas, queridas colegas, nuestra labor puede marcar la diferencia. La OEA también puede ser un motor para la igualdad, más necesario que nunca en este contexto de pandemia. En este propósito, saben que cuentan con todo el apoyo y con toda la complicidad de España. Muchas gracias y nuevamente muy agradecida porque me hayan dado la oportunidad de formar parte de esta jornada, que desde luego es muy valiosa y de la que he tomado muy buenas notas de todas las reflexiones que se han realizado. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Monton. Your presentation was not only inspiring, but it also allowed us to see what was happening in your country and the sort of examples that we can borrow from your country as we need to within our own hemisphere as suited. This has now taken us to a climactic point in our proceedings. And in the interest of time and in recognition of the fact that our moderator is unavailable today and sent in her regrets, I will just pose the one of the questions that I see in the chat, and very briefly, if an ambassador or two or three could give a really quick response to it, if he or she cares to do so. And one of the questions is, how do lesbian and bisexual women factor into the discussion of gender equality in the Caribbean, especially under the Convention of Belém do Pará? How do lesbian and bisexual women factor into the discussion of gender equality in the Caribbean, and especially under the Belém do Pará Convention? Is there any one of you which would like, or who would like to take a stab at this question? Trust me, the second one is even more provocative, okay? So, Ambassador Edmonds, please go ahead.
I won't shy away from the question. The reality is that it's not sort of taken into consideration effectively within. I can really only speak for my country. I can't speak for wider CARICOM. You know, even when we look at, we at the OAS, we tend to pass resolutions. Within them, we look to the issue of the various communities, and notably many countries, we footnote them. And at the end of the day, that's evidence of the fact that within our own domestic environments, that we have not taken the issues on frontally, and we have not made the necessary adjustments, maybe at times to our own constitutions, to basically effectively address the issue. So the reality is that we can look within we can look within the Empire, but this is a domestic issue, and we're behind, and we're woefully behind in terms of our unwillingness to take on these sorts of issues, and there's nothing more to say. I mean, there's a reality, and we need to do a better job of recognizing that we have people within our societies that we are not protecting, and we are not serving well by pushing these issues down the road and not addressing them.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Edmonds. I know I can always depend on you to take the bull by the horns when it comes to these thorny issues. Is there anyone else from the Caribbean, the ambassadors from the Caribbean, who would be willing to speak? You may jump in. I cannot see, so you may jump in if you. Ambassador Philip Spencer, are you taking a stab at this?
No, I was just taking an urgent call and rejoining. So
My apologies. My apologies, Ambassador.
We have even missed some of the full context of the question.
Would you care that I should repeat it?
Sure.
Okay. And the question reads, how do lesbian and bisexual women factor into the discussion of gender equality in the Caribbean, especially under the Convention of Belém do Pará?
Right, so thank you. That's a question that signals the value of the discussion that we've been having this morning. What we've been doing here is unveiling the need for really direct engagement of issues that are affecting our citizens. I know that if I speak in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, these are matters that have begun to receive the attention of our judicial system. And you know that there's a process where when there's sufficient advocacy and representation on matters like this, it's only a matter of time before the interests of women, lesbians, and gays, the LGBTQI community must be included if we are to be thorough. And if I borrow the comments from my distinguished colleague from Panama, where she highlighted that it's a matter of ensuring that we are faithful as defenders of democracy and as promoters of human rights. This discussion today clearly is another very important step in getting us to open the kimono, if I could use the term, and finally address these issues. It is a matter of policy. And if I could just pivot as well to an observation made by a distinguished colleague from St. Lucia. This is where in our region, the ability to bridge the interface of politics and policy really has to become much more inclusive. The approach has to be much more inclusive. It has to be much more integrative, as I think Ambassador Prince was observing from her moderation of her panel. How do we bring all of these interests and concerns of our people? Everyone. We don't want to exclude anyone. We speak of inclusion. How do we achieve inclusion, both from a political standpoint and a policy framework and implementation perspective? And I would suggest that we can't turn back now. The ship has sailed, the train has left the station. We must now get going. And I know some of the comments here is that we are behind. Clearly we're behind. And clearly it is a case for when will the policy catch up with what I refer to elsewhere as a matter of a public policy expectation on the part of our citizens, who now expect public policy to make expressions that close the gap and give legitimacy to the exercise of political and democratic governance. So thank you. That's all I'll say for now. I know Trinidad and Tobago, I see a comment here that Trinidad and Tobago has placed footnotes on OAS resolutions. Yes, because it is a journey, and I've made the point that we've got to recognize that different countries have advanced in this journey at different rates. And I'm not sure that there's any country that would wish to be racing ahead of the will of its people. It goes back to the key concern of ensuring that the voices of all are heard in the political process and in the policy-making process. And that's how the change will come. We are well on the way. We have to keep going. We can't turn back now. Thank you.
I see that Ambassador Maria del Carmen Roquebert would like to speak to the issue at hand.
Sí, aunque la pregunta no estaba más focalizada al Caribe, yo creo que siguiendo el ejemplo del embajador Philip Spencer, creo que es importante reconocer cuándo avanzamos, pero también reconocer asignaturas pendientes que tenemos, y en mi país esta claramente es una de ellas, porque cuando uno tiene este puesto de representación, representa al Ejecutivo, pero también tenemos que tomar en cuenta que existen poderes del Estado con los que tenemos que trabajar también en conjunto, junto con la sociedad civil, para avanzar en temas de equidad de las personas en toda su diversidad. Y creo que ahí es donde está la importancia de espacios de discusión como este y de espacios e instancias del sistema interamericano, como una Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos que ya estableció una pauta y un estándar de protección de derechos humanos para las personas de la comunidad LGTBI+, como el matrimonio igualitario, en los que todavía países como Panamá tienen asignaturas pendientes y estamos trabajando a lo interno para seguir avanzando. Yo creo que lo importante de estos espacios y también de lo que se ha revelado con la pandemia es que no podemos take for granted lo que se ha avanzado y que hay riesgo de retroceder en cuanto al reconocimiento de los derechos de las mujeres, pero también que tenemos asignaturas pendientes que en nuestros países todavía no hemos logrado cumplir. Por eso es que celebro este espacio, celebro también que las palabras del embajador Philip Spencer, porque se trata cómo desde el multilateralismo, un multilateralismo integral, inclusivo, nos permite avanzar y apoyarnos mutuamente para que no solo sean más derechos para más personas, sino todos los derechos para todas las personas. Gracias.
Thank you very much for that intervention and that response. This concludes the question and answer session. And as we wind down, I thank you for all of your contributions to the Q&A, and it shows that we are indeed inclusive of other perspectives within the discourse that we're having here, and the conversation continues. Allow me to introduce our final speaker by first noting that the CIM, Inter-American Commission of Women, has in the past partnered with the Organization of Women of the Americas in the common cause of empowering women and children. Today, Mrs. Deborah Stout Lynch, president of the Organization of the Women of the Americas and wife of the ambassador, permanent representative of Barbados to the Organization of American States, has been invited to offer some closing remarks on behalf of her organization. President Stout Lynch, I am pleased to offer you the floor.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, Senora Alejandra Mora Mora, Executive Secretary, Inter-American Commission of Women of the Organization of American States, members of the Diplomatic Corps and international organizations, members of the Organization of Women of the Americas, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to join you and to provide closing remarks on these very important discussions. The Organization of Women of the Americas, OWA, is grateful for its inclusion in today's important dialogue amongst nations of the Caribbean and Latin America. As you are aware, OWA is a nonprofit charitable organization of the Organization of American States, OAS, that is dedicated to empowering and improving the lives of women and children across the Americas. As OAS president, I am pleased to be included in this timely and critical conversation. First, I must repeat the oft-quoted statement that women's rights are human rights, and reiterate the point that if women are not explicitly mentioned, we are explicitly ignored and impacted. Any action that creates a platform for the rights of women in any form and at any level to be acknowledged and furthered creates a broader and deeper context for individual, national, and hemispheric socioeconomic development. Today's engagement on the empowerment of women and the promotion of gender equality through foreign policy is particularly critical to achieving these objectives and advancing this movement. As we've heard today from each of our informed panelists, the key role that women play in the diplomatic environment must not simply be highlighted. It must be emphasized and encouraged. Many women are already at the table and integrally involved in the conversation of furthering the multilateral system. This system is a structure and conglomerate arrangement that small developing nations so much depend upon for their existence and even survival. Any action that strengthens the system is critical to advancing hemispheric development. The question that must be answered is, are we there yet in giving pride of place and space to females in the ongoing discussion? I fear not. It is true to state that many doors have been opened and many opportunities provided. However, much remains to be done to achieve gender balance and equality in this male-dominated environment. Women must be better represented within multilateral settings and provided with greater opportunities to not only make these decisions, but to lead. It is constantly being proven that in every sphere in which females have been given the opportunity to lead, that we have brought a more detailed, more conciliatory, and more inclusive approach to the discipline. The diplomatic field is no exception. In my native country, Barbados, we have been the recipients of such leadership and have on record the longest serving female Minister of Foreign Affairs ever. Any occurrence or action that has a deleterious effect on the multilateral system affects women as much as it does men. As has been stated today, because of the ratio of males to females in our societies in the Americas, women may actually be more positively and negatively affected than their male counterparts in every aspect of social and economic activity. It may even be more correct to state that depending on the nature of the issue, women may be in a better position to discuss and articulate the issues than men. The discussion today has included socioeconomic inequalities grounded in economic insecurity, environmental degradation and disasters, global pandemics, climate change, and migration. Many of these areas may actually affect women in ways that they don't affect men, and are thus better articulated in the global multilateral arena by women, and much better so than they could ever be by men. One such example is the fact that it has been scientifically proven, and revealed rather, that climate change, with the effect of global warming, may actually be having a negative effect on pregnancies. Surely on the surface, this is an arena better suited for women to articulate than men. Another consideration must be that foreign policy, thought, and actions at every level must be reshaped to better reflect gender considerations. OA, with the depth and breadth of its membership and its years of experience, stands ready to assist in any way possible to achieve this objective. However, OA's own existence and longevity is threatened by the insufficient attention it receives from the OAS and its agencies as a hemispheric organization, and by extension, that of its membership, both permanent and observer missions, the improvement of the lives of whose women and children is OA's reason for being. OA deserves and requires so much more active participation than just in its annual food festival. Notwithstanding, OA particularly values the partnership that we have with the SIM. This union provides us the opportunity to assist in supporting the SIM and the wider OAS in their specific areas of work. The work of the OAS in developing multilateral solutions to combat fractured economies, failed democracies, the pressing issue of migration that so negatively impacts women and children, and underdevelopment in numerous forms is extremely important to our organization. As a constituent of the OAS, we stand ready and willing to assist. Going forward, being more fully involved, viewed, and valued as a partner in this multilateral theater provides that opportunity. Finally, we congratulate the SIM for hosting this critically important event and on its success. Today's dialogue is extremely timely and underscores the necessity for not only discussions such as this, but tangible action. To the panel of distinguished presenters, Thank you for your enlightening and noteworthy perspectives. On behalf of the membership of OA, sincere thanks to Ambassador Philip Spencer for ensuring that OA has been included in the ongoing conversation around empowering women through enhanced foreign policy participation. OA looks forward to continuing its partnership and involvement in any action that promotes women's rights, gender equality, and equity in the foreign policy of the Americas. I thank you.
And I thank you, Madam President, for those enlightening remarks. I thank you. We definitely have noted OA's outreach to the SIM, and we will embrace you more in return moving forward, because you are right. You are a very important organization within the Inter-American system that needs further exploiting of the opportunities that you present for us to collaborate together. Thank you very much for that perspective. As I bring these proceedings to a close, on behalf of the Inter-American Commission of Women, I wish to thank our esteemed ambassadors, permanent representatives, our eminent guest speaker, and our permanent ambassador observer, our moderators, and our distinguished invited guests for taking the time to be here today to share with us your thought-provoking perspectives on engendering foreign policy. We appreciate your excellent contributions and congratulate you for them and your invaluable role in making this event an unparalleled success. I also wish to recognize the sterling leadership of Madam Executive Secretary Alejandra Mora Mora of the SIM and our hardworking SIM Secretariat for organizing such a timely discussion to help move the needle on topics such as these. Yet it would be remiss of me not to single out Her Excellency Ambassador Yolanda Smith, Permanent Representative of Grenada to the OAS, for her vision and the instrumental role she played in actualizing this event as the point ambassador of the SIM to the CARICOM Caucus of Ambassadors. We also thank the Office of the Assistant Secretary General for its unwavering support extended to us in this initiative. We could not have done this without the behind-the-scenes efforts of the Department of Conferences and Meetings Management and the effective coordinating role it played, along with our dedicated team of skilled interpreters who have served us so well beyond the call of duty for the duration of this event. Lastly, we express appreciation to our wonderful audience, including the representatives of our diplomatic missions and international organizations, representatives of the OAS General Secretariat, members of civil society and women's NGOs, the academic community, and our partners at the national and regional levels of the hemisphere. We value each one of you who support us and have supported us in this worthy initiative and were part of this important, unfolding, and not yet concluded conversation. The conversation continues until we get action on what we are trying to achieve. We look forward to welcoming you back to further high-level dialogues organized by the SIM and its partners for the advancement of women's rights and gender equality and parity throughout the Americas. I wish you well and thank you for being here with us today. Goodbye.